Welcome to today's episode of the Product Growth Podcast. I'm really excited to have my friend Colin who's been a three-time senior director of product at places like Udacity, Noom, and Patreon. Colin, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Akash. I've always wanted to do this for the past year, probably.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad we've had you on. You wrote probably one of the pieces that most people mention to me when I ask them, oh, what did you hear about product growth from? They say, oh, yeah, that product leadership job search piece. So I'm really excited to go even deeper into the product leadership job search today. And since we wrote the piece, I think it was March, so it's been over a half a year. I'm curious, as people have been talking to you, what have been the things that product leaders consistently are getting wrong about the product leadership job search?
Yeah, this is a big one. So one of the very first things is if they read that piece, they knew that executive recruiters, VC talent partners, these are some new channels they didn't maybe know existed to be able to go and network. And one of the things they're doing is just 90% cold outreach without positioning and not really doing relationship network building and reputation based job search. That is the number one thing. There are a few other mistakes, but that's the most common one I hear.
So say a little bit more. How do you do a reputation-based job search?
Yeah. So there's a few things that you want to avoid doing. So first is just you need to understand who is doing the hiring and what their incentives are. So executive search firms, and we can talk a little bit about what the different search firms are. There's VC talent partners and the investors, and then of course there's the leaders themselves. And the incentives, though, when you go to an executive search firm, they're not working for you to get a job. They're trying to find the best, probably 5 to 10 candidates in the world for that role for the firm that's paying them maybe $100,000, $200,000 for this search. So if you just go in with a very blanket, hey, I'm qualified for this role, or hey, do you have any roles for me? They just don't either have the time or the incentive to be able to help you directly like that, unless you are very, very obviously one of those top candidates. So you have to do a little bit more extra work. So when I'm trying to run an active job search as a product leader, you want to think about your reputation first. This is one of the biggest differences between ICs and leaders. Just going in as a qualified candidate just isn't enough, right? So you need to first try to get referred by someone you work for or with, someone who's a second degree connection. You can look at company alumni, but ideally it's someone at a senior level or who has high reputation themselves, or a relationship to the decision maker. That's an executive recruiter or the actual leader themselves. Yeah, so the second thing I would do is just make sure that you tell your actual network that you're looking, but not just that you actually have a good candidate fit positioning statement. And that way, if your peers who are at the same level of you as you or in roles right now are getting inbound from recruiters, they can redirect those recruiters to you. That's like a very big one I've seen work. And then, of course, you want to go to executive recruiters, VCs, PE firms, whoever it is that you're targeting, but you want to go through people who can introduce you there. So one way to do it is just ask any of the executives that you know in your network, especially ones who have been placed in the last year or two, who is it that placed you? Who are the executive recruiters in your inbox that you have a good relationship with, and get an introduction from them. If you don't really have anyone in your network, for example, if you're trying to break into a new market or it's your first time as a leader, you just don't have a lot of exec leaders in your network, then one thing you can do is try to find the title peers, the people who are in the roles in the type of company that you want to be in. And most likely they've been placed by an executive recruiter who specializes in that type of company, in that type of role. They know that archetype. And so ask them for career advice. You're going to ask them a little bit about what it's like transitioning in there. If they came from a similar background, that's even better. But once you get that rapport built with them, then you can ask them what recruiters have been placing you or reaching out to you. And those are probably your best contacts for recruiters. And then finally, just tap your network. VCs, talent partners, you can tap your network of other execs, but even the people who are your former direct reports who might be in these companies, they can give you referrals. And you just have to find a way to get some sort of first or second degree intro. And then, of course, you can do cold outreach and cold applications. Those are a big part of your portfolio. It's just not the first thing you should be doing.
Is your product team having trouble in capturing the true voice of customers? That's because user feedback is scattered across channels, making it nearly impossible to catch crucial conversations. It's time you're able to centralize your voice of customer from everything like your CRM, customer portals, call recordings, or even public reviews. That's where Zeta.io comes in, our podcast partner today. With Zeta's AI, you can plug your customer conversations in and it will allow you to easily slice and dice these into actionable insights for your key product areas so that you can do more to improve NPS scores, analyze features, identify new features, or perhaps understand why you lost a few deals. This paves the way for planning the right features and channeling your efforts into actually planning and building your roadmap to finally close that loop 10 times faster. Product managers around the world use Zeta.io and use it to really improve their product discovery. It's plug and play in just minutes. So visit zeta.io/LPS/AkashGupta to get an extra 10% off.
Right, because most jobs, they're unlisted. So you have to be pursuing these types of channels. What you didn't talk about was like setting up triggers on LinkedIn to get jobs relevant to your area and then applying in the first 24 hours and customizing your resume for the position so you stand out, because those tactics generally, the higher you go, the less effective they are.
Yeah, exactly. And at the leadership level, I mean, we had this chart in the article where it showed as you go up from senior IC to director all the way up to CXO, it goes from 30% of the roles being hidden or unlisted to almost 90% plus when you're at that CXO level. And so if most of the roles are hidden, then applying online should not even be like a big part of your portfolio at all. Of course, leaders are usually applying at multiple stages of company. So they might be applying for, an L7 role at Meta, director or senior director role at a public company, and then, a VP role at a hypergrowth. But if you're going for those VP roles at hypergrowth, then you're only going to get those through networking. They're almost never listed, and for very good reason. The company doesn't want to tell the world that they're hiring for some roles sometimes. The internal team and the person that's in the role right now might be being replaced. They don't want to show that. And they don't want to get a flood of unqualified applicants. Their time is very precious, especially the hiring managers in those cases. They're usually founders or CPOs. And they just need to get who are the top, put in front of me, the top 10 to 20 people. I'll calibrate who is going to be the best fit for this role. And then let's try to close those people. And that's kind of how they run those searches. So you have to find out, how do I get into that group? And that's usually through reputation.
And when we say reputation, a lot of people, they immediately think writing content online, speaking at conferences, appearing on podcasts. How effective are those channels?
That's a really good question. And that's a misconception. When I say reputation, it's almost always individual, one-to-one personal reputation. Someone talks about you who they themselves have reputation in that network, right? But I have seen the public brand thing come up, and this was a surprise for me. It was actually a misconception. I didn't actually think that your public persona or brand can really help you, but I've seen two different instances where this matters. So the first is if you're going for very top level CXO roles and you're at that level, like you're a VP in some company, some major company, having a reputation online, doing speaking engagements, talking on social media can actually make you seem as it gives someone a sense of your personality and what your brand is, what your culture is, and that's very important for leaders when they're trying to visualize this is the person who's going to lead my entire organization and set the culture. And so I've heard some leaders and some executive recruiters tell me that they've actually found people, or the leader said, hey, I know, Shreyas, or, I know someone who has written online about this, or I saw them at the speaking gig. The second thing is sometimes when people are less traditional candidates, having a very tight niche reputation in an area can help them. So I was talking to Bobby Gormson, who's like a 20 plus year partner at, these executive search firms. He used to head talent at Etsy through their IPO. Like, he's been around for a while. And he was talking about this search he was doing, a very difficult search for a technical candidate. And he couldn't really find anyone who was at the big brands who was really perfect for the role. But then he saw someone who had done these speaking gigs, was running a local meetup for the specific technology. And he actually showed videos of that person to the hiring manager. The hiring manager first saw the profile and was like, nah, this person has no brands on their resume. They're kind of like a consultant. But he showed them those videos of the person talking and showed them their reputation in that field. And so they eventually got to get that person deep into the process.
That's really interesting because some people also worry about the flip side of producing content or appearing at speaker gigs, which is you're not necessarily promoting your company, you're kind of promoting yourself. How do you walk that fine line?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And, I honestly, for most candidates, it's not going to really make sense to do a lot of speaking gigs until you're in some sort of relatively prominent position. But, your company doesn't care that much as long as it's kind of on brand for the company and giving a good publicity to the products that the company is launching. So, for example, the Gemini team at Google just went on a podcast run. So they had kind of cleared that with their PR department. I'm sure they wanted to Google was probably happy to show that their brand was a little bit entrepreneurial and scrappy. And so that lined up really well for them. And that's going to be, good for the company, good for you. But as long as you're talking about something relevant to the company, it's fine. But I see tons and tons of executives who are successful, who are not the ones getting laid off, who are doing speaking engagements. And it's usually out of something that is a passion of theirs. So women in product is a very common one, right? Like talking about something that you have a passion for, your company's not really going to care that much. If it's very obviously self-serving, that's a very different thing.
Okay. So try not to be very obviously self-serving. The Notebook LM example is not self-serving in the least. Like that's just promoting your product. People are wondering, can they only do that type of content or can they do stuff that's a little bit more like what would have been different is if the Google PM started writing like AI market overviews or something like that, because then the company might perceive, oh, maybe she's preparing to make a move to Anthropic or OpenAI or something.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I would say, to be honest, like I don't really know what the end answer is, and I think the story is yet to be told on this. There are just so many more creators now who are professionals than there were before. Like the chief strategy officer at Fair is like an epic a creator. There's a CPO. CPOs at tons of like hypergrowth companies are producing content all the time and doing these supposedly like 80-hour a week plus jobs. And so will those people be the ones that stick around? I'm not sure, but it does attract talent. It does give them a good reputation in the field, and it gives some positive employer brand attention to them, even if they're not talking about anything about the product themselves. So I think they're taking that bet. And those seem like very smart, like people who are very accomplished. So I would trust their judgment on this. But, I couldn't tell you that it's going to work out for everyone. And I think we both saw there were a lot of creators in the last wave of layoffs who got laid off. And that could have just been a numbers thing. But, there's probably some truth to the fact that if you're spending all day creating and you're not making the impact at work, that's not your number one thing, then you're going to be a target.
Exactly. I think if you're going to be a creator, you need to make sure that your work understands that work is your number one thing. And it probably also needs to be your number one thing. Start from what actually is your number one thing, and then that's what people will perceive because the self is always shining through, especially at work when you spend 40 to 80 hours a week there. So that's how people handle that. So then the channels that really matter more for this reputation-based job search are these one-to-one channels. So let's go a little bit deeper one by one. What I have found personally is like the most effective channel for me has been LinkedIn outreach, often like personalizing the invite or sending an in-mail with something incredibly short but relevant and showing kind of some proof of work. Would you agree is that's kind of like the most effective channel?
I would say when you combine the volume you can do with the conversion rate, it is going to be the most effective channel for sure. It is not the only channel, and it kind of depends on your reputation, your ability to do this type of networking, and the types of roles you're going after. But to be honest, for most people, you should be doing a good chunk of this like cold but very personalized outreach. And I think that's the key component. And you've written about this quite a few times over the last year, but it just needs to be, you need to show that you've done your homework. You need to have a very clear positioning. And I'll talk about that. This is one thing I hear from executive recruiters and founders all the time, or just people who are trying to help people network. You need to have an extremely clear positioning statement. Your candidate fit statement needs to be perfect, right? Like they need to know, Somer Hackley wrote this awesome guide to a book on how to demystify like executive search for executives across like different industries. And she calls it the remember me when statement. And they need to know like, oh, when I see this type of a company with this type of stage with this type of revenue change that they're going through, and they're going from a single product to a multi-product, or they're scaling too fast. They need to know what's that intersection of things that you are perfect for. So when that comes up, they're like, oh, immediately I can recall. But if you just give them this very generic, I'm looking for anything in the early Series C through public companies and in fintech, and I do B2B SaaS, like that's a million roles, and they're not going to know whether you're the perfect person for that. So what are you actually bringing to the table? And then Bobby would call this an archetype, but I have a slightly different view on like the product leadership archetypes. But what he meant by archetype is that combination of things, like what is the scale of company? And he usually breaks it down, if you're talking about early stage, from 0 to 40 million, from 40 to 100 million, then 100 to 200, and then above that, like it kind of is all a little bit more fungible. And then, is it B2B? Is it fintech? Are you more of a platform PM or a GM style PM? All of those things kind of matter when you combine them. And if you're very clear on that, you're going to be able to get people to remember you when things come their way. Otherwise, you just kind of fall into the background.
Yeah, I always talk about 4 vectors: location, company size, industry, and type of PM. Like across those 4 of those, you need to make a conscious choice. And the language I've started to use is the 3 horizons, just because all these product leaders are so used to the McKinsey 3 horizons for their corporate and product strategy. What's your first horizon? Where are you? It's a very narrow slice of market where you are probably the best candidate in the world just based on your resume. That's like your first horizon. Your second horizon, like, there's maybe like 100 people in your competitive set. And then your third horizon, there's thousands of other leaders out there like you. That's how I've started to think about mentally trying to define your candidate market fit more granularly.
I love that. Honestly, like that's a really good way to look at it. And I think of it very similarly. We talk about candidate market fit. A lot of people have been talking about that lately. And I think that has 2 dimensions. Part of it is like, what is the market what is the actual market for you right today? Not just like in general, but right now in this market. So what's realistic, right? And that's usually like different degrees of probability. And so you have to have a portfolio in your search. This is another thing that candidates are just kind of networking left and right. They don't really know how to do their search in a structured way. You should have a portfolio where that first horizon is maybe 30, 40% of your portfolio, then 20% for the next, and then, the remainder for a few other, more risky bets, things that you might have to stretch for. And you might also have to put in that portfolio steps back in this market, especially if things aren't going well for you after like 4 or 6 months, the market might be telling you something, right? So that's a great way to look at it. Another way I like to look at it, especially when you start honing in on a specific company or opportunity, is how can you become the market of one? What is that role where even if there's 5 amazing candidates with great brands who have kind of done things in this market, what makes you the market of one, the one that they really want to get out that batch? And sometimes it's not the flashy person. It's the person who has that intersection of experiences and understanding and passion that match this role perfectly, and they just get it. And that's one of the biggest things. And that even goes to negotiations, not just like for getting seen for the opportunity in the first place.
Yeah, it's funny. All the things that help you get the opportunity, they help you in the negotiation as well. So sometimes people are like, I have this role in the bag, and they almost want to like kind of like punt on working hard on doing the final steps of it. And I'm always like, no, go harder. This is our leverage, right? We're just increasing kind of the demand for us. So if the first channel that's most important is this direct LinkedIn outreach, the second tends to be this personalized email where you use a tool like Apollo to find somebody's email. And I notice a lot of people, they complain to me that they have low reply rates to these emails. And then usually only takes like a session or 2 for them, and we can get it up to like 95, 100%. I'm curious if you've had the same experience, and if so, like what are the things people need to do to get their reply rates up?
Yeah. So what are those dimensions of a great outreach? So the first thing is just like something that's a genuine and unique hook for them. And that's usually a personalization. And, the bar is getting that higher now. Now that more people know they have to personalize, I get so many emails. I see people get so many emails where it's like, hey, I saw you did this one post. Like, I liked it. Now, can you get me a job? Right? Like, that's the most basic bad way to do it now. That used to be actually a pretty high reply rate way to do it a year ago, but no longer. Now people kind of know that and they're getting tons of those. So you have to go a bit deeper. You have to do more research on this person. And one of the most, especially when you're going to leaders, they're less about the like transactional kind of like engagement. What they like to do when they're at that leadership level, and it's kind of why they're a senior leader, is they love to mentor and coach people. And so if you can come in with something that they uniquely can answer for you that no one else can, and that can be like, oh, you went from commerce to fintech and like from startup to big tech, and like I'm thinking of doing that move, but like you've done this before, and you kind of like know where I'm coming from. I'd love to talk through that decision with you. And I've helped someone do that. Their original pitch to me, they were like, intro me to this VP at a big company. And their original pitch was, I'm looking for this type of role. I love your company. Can I talk to you? And I was like, he's not even going to reply to me, even if I know him, right? But we gave that pitch and he was very happy to jump on a call with them. And now if a leadership opportunity comes up, he has an actual conversation. He has a deeper knowledge of that person. And of course, this gardening technique, which takes longer, can be frustrating when you're like a few months into a search, right? But you just have to do it. You have to plant seeds as in many places as you can and water those things, nurture those things. If you don't, if you just like throwing seeds out into the wind, you're unlikely to get an opportunity that really hits.
Yeah. The third thing that I think is really effective, and this is what I think was the aha moment for a lot of people in the piece, was recruiters. And you talked a little bit about the best ways to get recruiters at the top, just to summarize for everybody. Like the very best way is to go through your old LinkedIn DMs from 2021 and 22 when recruiters were reaching out to you a lot. The second best way is to tell your own network or reach out to your friends who have recently got jobs and figure out who their recruiters are. The third way is just to figure out the major firms, and we'll talk about that in a second. Or actually, that's what I want to talk about now is like, how do they kind of do this sort of like proactive way or other ways beyond those two major ways to find recruiters?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the recruiters that reached out to you in the past. There's, you talk to your friends in your network and see who are the recruiters they worked with. Those are the two best ways by far, right? And sometimes you can expand your network and then get their recruiter contacts as well. And I talked a little bit about that when I said, find that person who is in the role you want. The recruiters that place them there are probably the ones that you want to talk to. But at some point you tap out on that and you need to just go directly to the recruiters. And cold messages can work for recruiters. And I've seen it work in different ways, but the first thing you need to do is understand it's not just the firm, it's the individual recruiter. So like getting in touch, just because you talk to someone at Riviera, it does not matter. In fact, like they have good tech internally at these firms, but they don't talk to each other. They're not up to date on all the things that are happening. And you need to talk to the right people and probably multiple people at each firm at different levels. So if you talk to the partner, that partner is doing business development, trying to find new clients. They're not running the active search. The director, the researcher, like the principal, like those are the folks that you probably want to talk to when you're doing a very active search, the ones who have the searches on their plate. And then you need to do just basic research. You can go to their websites and go to their bios on LinkedIn, and you can find out what they specialize in. Many of them specialize in PE only or public companies, like those mid-market public companies, or some of them are late stage growth and some of them are early stage. And some of them are fintech, some of them are AI. You just need to find who is the person that's most relevant to you. And then if you reach out with that, hey, I am this like archetype looking for AI companies. I know you place AI. I know that's your specialty, or PE. Here's a bit about the quick blurb on what is my accomplishments, what are the stages that I've done before for sure, and I'd love to talk to you. That usually works out for people. And it doesn't take a lot. But you do have to think about what's the candidate assessment checklist that recruiter's going for. So when they get a search, they have this candidate assessment kind of report that they will put together on each candidate. And it has those checklists like revenue scale they've done, team size they've managed, are they in the right market? Have they dealt with this specific problem, this inflection point that we're going through? If I'm replacing an old CPO, VP, director with someone new, what is that difference that I'm looking for, right? Like you have to kind of think through these things and very concisely be able to state like, what is your take on that? What is your positioning? And if you can do that, then they will be happy to talk to you. If you have a very, very unmarketable, honestly, like there are a lot of people that just have unmarketable profiles. They're coming from, traditional like non-tech firms in a big tech role and they're trying to break into VC. It's much harder these days to get in front of those recruiters because those recruiters are paid to place brand names. I was talking to the head of fintech recruiting at one of the top companies, and he's like, "No, a founder today, they say, I'm paying you $100,000, $200,000 to give me the brand names. Like the people who I'm at 50 million, I want to go to 100 million. Who are the people who have been the first or second in command to go to 50 to 100 million at the top firms? That's what they're looking for. So you can't just expect to get in there through just the executive recruiters, and you'll need other routes in there. So you just have to set your expectations. And that's when you can go, hey, maybe I'll go to the public or the PE-backed executive recruiter because they have more loose criteria. They're not looking for these brand chasing things. They're like, we just want competent people who have done this thing before so we can get, financial results for our companies.
Yep. And can you go a little bit deeper into just the main names and kind of like a market overview of recruiting for folks who may not be as familiar with that market?
Yeah. So there's really, I break it into three kind of categories. So there's the big five, the Shrek firms, Spencer Stewart, Heidrick and Struggles, Russell Reynolds, Egon Zehnder, Korn Ferry. Those are ones that really like to work with the Fortune 500, 1000. They tend to work on VP plus roles. Usually like older, more established companies is their sweet spot. There are exceptions to that, of course, but those are the types of companies you go to, especially if you have done very large scale ownership. If you're in a traditional company, like you might be hit up by those types of folks, or if you're in just like prominent named established companies, you're going to be hit up by those folks. For the majority of people who are leaders in the tech industry, you're most likely in the like hypergrowth stage, or you're coming down from a lower leadership level at FANG. That's when you want to go to the mid-market firms. So Diversa, Riviera, TrueSearch. Those are the three main ones. You definitely should know them. You definitely should know, especially the categories and specialties that are relevant to you there. And you've probably been hit up by them if you have a really good profile, or your friends have if they have good profiles. And then, not to be like underestimated, tons of boutique firms. So because of the big market contraction in tech jobs over the last 2 years, a lot of those firms like grew like wild in 2019 to 2021 and then contracted. And so a lot of the great partners decided to break off and create their boutiques. And they have very, very good clients in those boutiques as well. So I would definitely look for those. I know some really good ones, like Artisanal is a bigger one now. They're kind of starting to become an established player. Smaller ones are like Fusion. Andrew Abramson there is really great. Sterling Strand, People Project. There's just a ton of these boutique companies out there. And they're more likely to want to build their network as they're establishing themselves. So they actually might be much more responsive to you than someone who's working at Riviera or TrueSearch.
That's been my experience as well. Is the smaller the firm, actually, usually the better the candidate experience will be. Maybe even the better, what I've found out from certain people, the negotiation they'll do on your side. I feel like they seem to have more incentive for like each role they place to like squeeze the maximum out of it.
That's funny. So I guess an implication of your statement there is that they might be on some sort of contingency. Most of them are not actually, especially if they've been an established recruiter and now are doing these companies. They do set retainers, which is paid partly on success of placement, but it's not dependent on how much money the candidate makes. So the reason that they're trying to get the company to, they're negotiating on your behalf to get the company to give you an offer is because they want you to be placed and they want you to be happy about that placement and stay. Though, especially in those boutique firms with those older partners, they just understand the long term. They're not like some 2 years out of college person just trying to like close this thing so they can get onto their next search. They really understand what makes a good fit, how to build those long-term networks, and that's how they're building their book of business over the long term. So they will go to bat for you. They just know how to translate. They know how to get a really good deal done between a founder who's never done this before or has done this maybe 2 times in their life and a candidate.
Say more about who these people are, what they're motivated by. I was just recently talking, I had the pleasure to talk to like a Michelin chef, and he was telling me what runs our restaurant is the regulars. And that explained it all. Like, he's like, yeah, we have to change the menu every single night because we have people who come like twice a week and they also tip the best. And that's who our entire
Yeah.
business is based off of. Do recruiting firms create long-term relationships with certain high-profile execs that they consistently place, or what are their
Mhm.
motivations?
Yeah. I had one senior recruiter tell me that they have this kind of like 3-stage system of when a search comes up, who do they think about first, second, and third, right? And the people they think about first are the people not when they're like, oh, these are the top brands that the client asked me for, I'm going to go like search on LinkedIn for them. It's actually the people that are very top of mind that they've worked with in the past, that they may be placed before, that they know that person is this archetype or has this remember me when statement, and it fits this role. And I'm going to reach out to them first. And then if not them, the people that they know, right? Second, they then go into their database. They usually have a database of like folks they've worked with before, other people in the firm have worked with. This is one of the big selling propositions of the bigger firms like mid-market and Shrek firms. They just have this huge database. They know who's on the market right now, looking at other companies, and they know who they've placed before. And so they'll go there next. And then third, they'll do LinkedIn search. And then it becomes an SEO and CRO game, right, for a candidate to make sure they're showing up in that search.
And that, I think, is the third most effective channel. After recruiters and cold outreach on your own is optimization of your LinkedIn. So what parts of your LinkedIn should a leader be looking at?
Yeah, so there, like I said, there's those two components. It's search engine optimization, then conversion rate optimization. So in SEO, there's an executive recruiter will use two types of technologies. They'll either use a LinkedIn recruiter directly or a third-party platform that kind of does some magic on top of that and aggregates other databases. And so when they're doing a search, what usually comes up is your headline and maybe your more recent company and role. And then if they're searching for a specific keyword, it will pull up whatever. It's very similar to Google in that way. It'll pull up the section of your profile that has that keyword. And they won't even click in if that isn't showing up. And sometimes if you don't even have that keyword, it won't even show up in the search at all, right? And these searches aren't just like, I'm doing an active search, I'm scanning through, I'm clicking. They kind of save these searches and they get notified. So if you actually set your open to on LinkedIn for recruiters only to open to work, they actually get pinged on LinkedIn Recruiter and their third-party platforms, which is why a lot of people, when they do that, or if they turn it off and on once a month, will start getting a bunch of inbound that next week. This is because there's a notification going out to some people if you're in their saved search list. So that's the search part. Then once they get into your profile, then it's all about conversion rate optimization. And this is where, like, I see a lot of people do keyword stuffing, or they do the opposite. It's usually two extremes. It's usually a whole lot of nothing burger, like qualitative language. I'm a customer-centric, strategic focus. Like, if the next three candidates can say the same thing, then you shouldn't say it. You should only say things that only you can say. That is what should be on your profile. So, and think through that checklist. What is that candidate assessment or report checklist, right? If you're a growth stage kind of person, then what are those revenue and team building scales? I grew it from 50 to 100 million, 5 to 10 people. I am a GM style leader who has owned P&L. I take products that are like one product and I launch the enterprise go-to-market for consumer companies, like anything that's very specific. And then once you have that, then you can start layering over a little bit more human, because you do want to talk like a human and talk to a human. But honestly, even if you don't do that, I've seen people have success. So those checkboxes just have to be there. When a recruiter's coming through, they don't only have so much time to like skim through this. They will skim to your experience. They'll skim down the company names. They'll skim down, like, if you have a line under the company name and title of I owned X for this company, and like describe the company. Don't assume they know what it is. If it's a $1 billion, $100 million revenue Series C startup, just write that. It just makes their life so much easier. Otherwise, you might lose out because they'll think, oh, I don't know what this company is. Maybe it's like a PE company that's not relevant to me. And then show your scope of ownership, and then have 2 to 3 bullets, fewer than your resume. So it doesn't have to go as deep as your resume. They will ask for your resume later. This is just the first part. It's like, you don't want to have a million bullets on your landing page. 2 or 3 bullets that are main accomplishments with quantitative metrics. And I was talking to Bobby last week about this. He's like very experienced recruiter. He said, if I don't have anything quantifiable on your LinkedIn to bring back to the hiring manager, you're never even going to get seen, because I have no evidence that you actually did the things that are relevant to that company. So you actually have it on LinkedIn. And that's the other extreme I see. People just have nothing, or they'll write product at whatever and like have no bullets under it. Based on the brand names that you have on your resume, maybe you'll get some outreach based on your reputation. but you're losing a lot of inbound by not having that detail there.
Yeah, I have seen it like bimodal almost, or it reminds me kind of the midwit meme. Like, if you have a 99th percentile background, then you don't need to do any of this LinkedIn optimization, right? Like, if you worked for Google for 8 years and then you were at Meta for 9 years, yeah, just put product at Google, product at Meta. Don't even do anything else. Like, nothing else needs to be done. But for everybody else in the middle, you ideally will be doing this advanced optimization. And for me, I think that the main difference in our advice is I do recommend like trying to get the keyword search, like you mentioned. And I try to do it from like a metrics point of view. So I tell people like LinkedIn shows you how many profile views and visits you've had. So I say like, kind of just play a video game with yourself and, try out different things. And people consistently report back to me like more details, more keywords, because like people will look for oddly specific things. I remember last time I was job searching, I used to get a lot of people who wanted to build ad tech servers. Like ad tech server was probably like the 17th most important thing I did when I was at ThreadUp, but it was something I did, for like 6 months. And we did build a good one and we pretty much didn't have to iterate on it after we did it. So, but it got me a ton of inbound. So I think that there's also something to that where like, just making sure you're mentioning enough different product areas, enough domains of product. Most people who are product leaders, we don't have a straight line career. We had a zigzag. Yours too. Like you worked at these very different companies I look at sometimes. I'm almost like, how did he even jump from these companies to companies, right? So trying to like help people understand the whole amount that you have been exposed to, because as we all know in product, having been exposed really does make you better. So
Yeah, exactly. And I love that point. So most product leaders don't have a straight line career. There are the rare exceptions who are like, I just do ads product. I've always done ads product. At some point, those people usually just want to go outside of that too. So they need to find some variety in there, like, and almost manufacture it. But there's two really important points that you made. Number one, keywords. They will search for SaaS. If you don't have the word SaaS in your resume, like, and you did that, even if your company is SaaS, very clearly, even if you worked at like Slack, if you don't have the word SaaS, it's just not going to come up. It's very odd. Unless they're using some fancy AI like third-party software, you're not going to come up in the search. So you definitely have to have that. One way I do that is in the about section. I have like the above the line, like 12-year VP of product, X million to X million, these many people to this many people, GM, like just try and cram it all in there. Then I have 3 bullet points. They're your main 3 bullets of achievements that you've made. That are the biggest ones. And then some little blurb about like what kind of leader you are if you want to humanize it a bit. But then I just have honestly a keyword stuffing section of skills and experience where it's like market names, ad tech, like if you're talking about specific technologies you've worked on, and just put them all in there. And it's honestly just a checkbox so they don't have to do the like looking through your resume or looking through the rest of your LinkedIn. And that can work a lot. But the second part of what you said is that even though you have this variety of background, I hear this a lot from candidates, leader candidates. I've done consumer and B2B and whatever, but if you tell someone that, they're not going to know where to place you. So you have to be targeted. You can have 2 or 3 candidate fit statements for different targets of companies, but you have to figure out what's going to make me a market of one for this. And it's usually an intersection of some of those nuanced parts of your background, right? So have you done things that are very like high experimentation velocity, right? Well, maybe then you can go into a growth role, right? In consumer, but then just position yourself as that when you're talking to someone who's relevant in that area. And if you have like some SaaS or infrastructure background, you can put that together and make a platform archetype version of your fit statement. But you need to be able to have a very clear like what's going to make me a market of one. And then if you have a target role that's out there, then you can reverse engineer. That's better, right? Like, and you should use those early conversations with the executive recruiter telling you about the role, or the hiring manager, or just the job description. Reverse engineer that. What makes me like, oh, I hit these 5 things, and it's very rare that like every candidate is going to hit all 5 of these things. Can I put my profile together to be a market of one for this role?
yeah, and I think one thing that's underrated that people need to think about is just the psychology of your interviewee. Usually like 5 minutes before the interview, they finally have a second to prepare for the interview. And the first thing they do is go to your LinkedIn. And If they're, a B2B SaaS for developers and they just see a bunch of consumer products and a consumer product oriented LinkedIn, they're pretty much already disqualified you before they talk to you. So think even about on the day you're interviewing, is my LinkedIn customized for that role? If you're interviewing again for this developer product, put that in your headline: developer product focused product leader with 6+ years of experience in developer products. That way they realize, okay, this is not the only thing they've done, but they're at least interested in it now.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a very great point. And we didn't talk about that, both your resume and your LinkedIn, but more predominantly these days, your LinkedIn is what guides the rest of the interview process. It's whatever, like the designer, the engineering counterpart, the CEO, everyone's looking at that when they're reviewing you, either if they're interviewing you or behind the scenes, right? Because there are decision makers behind the scenes that are chiming in. And even if the panel is like, oh, this person is great, and then they look at your resume or your LinkedIn and they're like, oh, but like they're not clearly not like a fit, that can actually hurt your candidacy quite a bit. And so you have to make sure that if you're this week or this month like interviewing at these types of companies, marketplace companies, make your resume and your LinkedIn super matched to that type of profile.
And I always say there's a benefit to focus. It's just like in product, where all the product leaders intuitively understand this. We can't go after all the segments in the market. But then when it comes to their job search, they want to put their foot in all three camps. They're like, yeah, I worked in e-commerce, gaming, and fintech, so I want to be all three. And I want to be, but it's like, no, you actually have to make a choice. And what you just said makes a lot of sense, which is like for a month, you could focus on one segment. Then for another month, you can focus on another. But it's really important at a given time to have made a choice.
That's a really good point. And I have seen two strategies work for this. So one of them, the one you talked about, is what I call the sprint strategy. So you're like, I think I should go for, I know I should go for the same role again, do it again, right? Part of my portfolio. But I don't really want to do that. I first want to take a shot at, let's say, FANG or a VP role at a smaller startup. Well, then cater everything to that, do your networking based on that, and just do that for the next month. And that's what you're going to focus on. Don't try to go 3 different ways. So that's the sprint strategy. I have seen some people work pretty well when they segment out, their week to week or different days of the week, where they're focusing on different types of things, either different activities or different profiles of what they're searching. The challenge there is that your LinkedIn can only be one thing at one time. And so once you're actually in the loop, you're going to have to do that customization if you're going to take that tactic. And the benefit of that tactic is that you just get more volume and you don't miss out on opportunities just because of timing if you're always in the market for the 3 things. But yeah, exactly what you said. You can't launch the same product into 3 markets at the same time. You have to pick a lane and, pick it, have a hypothesis, go in, see if it's going to resonate, and then move on to the next one. It doesn't mean you can't come back and do another sprint on that one later.
So in my mind, those are the top 3 channels. And the 4th best channel is for you to work with VCs. Can you talk a little bit about this? Because I find a lot of product leaders have never actually done this, or they're nervous about how to approach VCs. What is the strategy here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So VCs actually have 2 components. There's the actual VC general partners. So those are the investing group. And then there's the talent partners. So this has become extremely common now. And this started with some of the bigger VC firms a few years back, but they actually get ex-executive recruiters or heads of talent at some of the hypergrowth companies to come on board internally. And that's an internal resource to help all of their portfolio companies to hire, figure out which search firms to use, that type of thing. And so you can actually treat them very similarly to an executive search firm because they usually have a few searches or companies that they're working with. But sometimes they're actually earlier in the process because the VC is actually telling the founder sometimes who they should hire, what roles they should hire, when they should hire their first CPO, that type of thing. So they're actually an advisor. And then there's that second component. They're not considered the vendor that I'm paying $100,000 for to get a brand. I'm taking their wisdom. I'm taking their advice. And so if you're a little bit less of a, spot on candidate with a top name brand, a VC's word can go a little bit further than an executive recruiter sometimes, depending on the situation. So that's really good. And then, of course, VC talent partners are those executive recruiters. Reach out to them very similarly, but you actually have more intel on them because you know who their clients are. Their clients are their portfolio companies. So if you go to that VC firm's website, you look at their portcos, you look for the ones that are like really on the money for you, and you can mention those in your outreach. You're like, I know these companies are at this stage. I have done this next stage of growth in this type of market before. I'd love to talk to you about, opportunities there or maybe elsewhere. And sometimes they'll have even advisory or like temporary positions for some of their portcos and not just like full-time positions, which can help you during a search. Always get an entry point for a conversation. The second is the GPs, the general partners. Those are just investors, probably harder to get a hold of, but you probably will know them through your manager, your skip managers networks. They are in those board meetings, right? They know those VCs, and you just have to start. It's very scary sometimes. I know even people who have like 30 direct reports and like multiple lines of leadership in their org are afraid of talking to their ex-CEO or ex-CPO about this, but you have to go out to them. Go ask them for advice again. They love being mentors. Ask them for career advice. And then once you build rapport with them, ask them about the VCs that they know, and they'll give you intros. And this has worked wonders. Even for someone who was a principal product manager level that I helped. He happened to know through his old CEO, who he just loved working with because he was on a special project with him. He asked him, like, get an intro. He got to a VC. That VC ended up introducing him to almost every, like probably half of the opportunities he had in his job search, just because he's like, oh yeah, talk to Andreessen Horowitz. And then that talent partner then got him introduced to other people. Oh, go talk to this executive over here. And then the last thing I would say about VCs is don't just focus on the big firms like Andreessen, et cetera. Same with the executive search, right? Like they're flooded. You can go for many, many small firms. There are tons and tons of VC firms out there. And the smaller they are, the more likely they're going to respond to you.
What I personally found with VCs is like one VC can lead to like 6 or 7 opportunities. And my approach was I just happen to have like VCs reach out to me pretty often because I do like market content and stuff like that. And so I would always convert them by being like, oh, I saw you led the investment in X, Y, and Z. I actually would like to work for them for XYZ reasons. Can you intro me to the founder? And I found like almost always they'll just reply back to the founder like within like 10 seconds. Like it's like a very underrated channel, I feel.
Yeah, 100%, right? And it doesn't even require a call. In fact, they don't like taking calls that they don't have to take. So yeah, once you get to that C-suite level, that VC level, they will just take action very quickly. Sometimes you'll get higher response rates from them because they just want to take like quick action. They'll do forward to the recruiter or reply with a CC to the person they want to intro you to. And they just do that from their phone very quickly. But that is a very, very good tactic, is find out who did they lead that actual investment, and you can find that out pretty easily.
So now I want to talk about a tough topic for most of the leaders, but if you've been on your search for 4 to 6 months, I think you need to lower your expectations and you need to broaden your search criteria. Talk a little bit about that and how people need to think about making these tough decisions to potentially go down a level, even 2 levels. I've seen VPs take principal roles and go down in compensation. I've seen like big tech PMs making 600K have to take 300K PM TC roles.
Yeah. And, this is a very personal decision, but I see just a lot of stubbornness because of people's experience. There are people who, for the past 15, 20 years, never had to do a job search. Like they always got their next role immediately. And so even if they're on the job search for 6 to 8 months, they're just unwilling to give up on their constant upward trajectory in their career. And they don't really understand that like sometimes you need to take a step back for various reasons. There are different reasons why you should do that. They're personal, right? Like sometimes it's financial runway. Sometimes it's, to get exposure to a new thing. Sometimes it's just for your own self-confidence. Until you're in a job, you're not going to be able to do that search for your next real role because your confidence is just so low at this point that it's going to be very hard for you to pitch yourself. And so once you've come to this realization that I need to take a step back, there are multiple dimensions you can do that. It's not always, for example, I have to take a huge pay cut or I have to take a much lower level. There are multiple dimensions. So one is if you want the same pay, for example, you can take a lower level role, bigger company, right? Like there are principals, there are actually L6s, not even L7s, making 500K at big tech companies, which you in cash, if you were a VP with a 30-person org in a hypergrowth company, maybe you were just making that in cash and maybe your equity was worth nothing. And so that might not actually be a huge step back for you. You build a network, you get a brand. There are other advantages to doing that. Of course, it's easier said than done, but it's not just the big FANG companies. There are tons and tons of high-paying companies in the top 100, 200 public companies. So that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is to go for a lower stage of company. So yeah, maybe you like are used to these big orgs and you don't want to like go to some company that's, just post market fit, but it gives you a new opportunity to grow. It's a story you can tell in your next step. Hey, I want to take a bet in this area. And, maybe even if it's a director, you were a director at a big company, you go to a senior director or a director at a much smaller company. That doesn't necessarily seem as like such a big step backwards. If you have some passion, if you have some other narrative to tell about why you wanted to take that bet on that company.
So I've just found a lot of people, they don't wake up to this early enough. How can people read the tea leaves better? What are the signals?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The the so first of all, like the first thing that any person that's going through this is going to think is I'm just not executing well enough, right? I need to polish my resume better, my LinkedIn better. I need to polish my pitch better. And although those things are probably partly true, you can do that in probably a week and get like 80% of the way there. And you're going to find out pretty quickly that it's not going to make the biggest difference in the world. So, of course, the first thing you should do is, are you doing the 10x outreach, the like 10x effort on that outreach, showing your passion in that outreach? Are you doing, all the networking you can? Have you been afraid to reach out to people in your network? I hear this all the time. They're like, "Oh, I reached out to like 5 people." I'm like, like 100 people who could be valuable to you. Why aren't you reaching out to 10 every week, right? If you haven't done those things, then yes, I would try to do that if you're earlier in their search. If it's month 6, 7, you've tried a bunch of these things, like even month 4, honestly, try to go apply for the earlier positions. Even if you think it's too early, I don't think I can take them. You will be very surprised about what can happen. One of the biggest things I saw happen, I had a director of product candidate who he was like, I know that this company reached out to me. I really wanted to say no. And I said, just take it. It was a senior product manager role at like a Series C startup. And it was obviously a step back. Like it would be very hard for him to like want to take it. But I'm like, it's at least something. It will give you confidence, especially if they like you a lot. He went through the process. We made the pitch at the end to get him up leveled, and it was a director offer. He didn't end up taking that. He took a better offer somewhere else. But things that are not negotiable at the beginning can be negotiable at the end. Once they see who you are and they realize what impact you can have, those senior roles, those principal roles, those director roles can go up a level. And you just have to like get in the door and start talking to the people. So I would just take it like that. Just take those opportunities. You never know what's going to happen. Maybe you fall in love with that company and realize that there's a lot of growth potential there. So overall, if you're 4 months into your search and you're not seeing a lot of traction, start applying for 1 or 2 levels down or 1 or 2 stages down, right? At all different types of companies you were completely writing off before. You'll be surprised what can happen if you do that. Sometimes they'll turn into bigger things, and sometimes you'll realize, you know what, I'm probably okay, at least for a year or 2 at this step back role.
Exactly. And I think that the one position that is having the hardest time accepting reality is kind of the mid-level leaders. So people who are group product managers, directors of product. I'm finding that they're just not finding jobs. I feel like those jobs have kind of been eliminated in favor of senior ICs. So it feels like that segment in particular needs to take a hard look at, if you have less than 5 years of people leadership experience, do you go back to an IC role?
This is a great point. There are fewer middle managers. As a percentage of all the roles out there, it's actually pretty much the same, but the number of roles has decreased, about half from the peak. And essentially, the problem isn't that there aren't open roles for these people, is that there were so many of them created during this big boom of hiring. There were just big teams of ICs that needed managers. So we're just promoting people to manager left and right. And now there's just fewer people. There are fewer ICs in general. And so you just don't need those managers. On top of that, there's this ethos of flatter organizations that's being spoken about. And so become an IC, totally. There's nothing wrong with it. You can prove your way into things. One big trend I'm seeing now is a lot of director roles that are director IC roles where you have to prove yourself before you can then get, people coming in. And this is not like, oh, it's just some fad. When I talk to people at Meta, like leaders and directors and VPs at Meta, they told me that we hired tons of directors who had never been at Meta before, never been at a FANG before. And they immediately were leading a team. They need to have results within 3 months. And they just couldn't do it. And so they were all left 8 to 12 months later because they just needed time to like build in, to prove themselves within that org, to build those relationships. And so taking a step back is totally fine in many cases. And you just have to accept that like being an IC sometimes is not bad. It's very, you probably like, when you took a step to leader, there's this kind of like air of relief. You get a lot more stress and a lot more things to do, but you stop doing some things. And there's almost this relief that I don't have to do some of the minutia. I get this like higher leverage pull on each of my decisions. I can then like have 2 or 3 people go out and do it for me, that people leverage. You lose that. It's very hard to like lose grip on that, but it's the reality of the market. You go out there, you have to prove your impact again.
Yeah. And the way I try to like help people enjoy it is often what you just said about thinking about bigger companies. If you're having to do this, if you were a VP of product with 10 million users and you go be a L7, for instance, at Meta, you might be impacting 2 billion users or something like that with some of the product features you're shipping. So you can actually still have amazing, if not more impact, even if you take a step back. And that
Yeah.
might be a way to kind of be okay with it.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a scenario that's happening right now. I'm coaching 3 of my candidates that I'm coaching. One director, one senior director, one VP. The VP has had like 30 direct report PMs under them in a big org. They applied to a director role at like a pretty prominent public company, not one of the FANGs, but one of the big ones that pays really well. And you would think that all 3 of them were like perfect fits for this role, but only one of them is still in the loop. And they're a VP with 30 people. So they were the only ones that actually got through to the later rounds. But then there's a question of, you're only going to have 5 people now. You had 30 people before. Are you going to be bored in this role? So they completely eliminated all the people that wouldn't have this problem from the process. But now they're questioning this. But it's exactly that pitch. It's a very easy pitch to make, which is I'm coming here to have a bigger impact. My last role was not this many millions of people. It was not this many millions of consumers. And, some dimension is probably different about it. This is a bigger brand with like higher talent density. There's just so much you can learn from those types of things. And so taking that leap is big. And this is the most common thing, right? We can talk about this a little bit, but people just like I keep hearing this and I don't know why I keep hearing it. I want to jump on a pre-IPO rocket ship and cash out for millions of dollars. And it's just it's a pipe dream for most people, honestly. I don't think that pre-IPO thing is going to work out for the majority of people unless it's honestly one of the really, really sure bets. So yes, it works out for some people, but those odds are way lower than you think they are. If you do that effective value calculation, it's not going to be in your favor.
Yeah, I think people should just not assume that they can pick, even if it feels like a sure thing. Like, just today on the recording of this podcast, Arc Browser apparently is like abandoning Arc Browser and releasing a new browser. A month ago, if you asked people, they would have said, oh, Arc Browser, that's a sure thing to IPO. It's like, it's very hard for you to kind of determine. I prefer to refer people to the stats. There are success rates by stage of funding or series. So you kind of can just look at that. Like how many Series D companies actually end up IPOing? I think it's only something like 30%. So you get to Series E, finally you get to like 40%. So even if you have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, it doesn't mean anything like an IPO, especially an IPO at a valuation above what you're valued if the company was valued in 2021 during the ZERP era is likely.
Yeah. I actually think I kind of know where you're getting those stats. Those stats are from like 2013. It is such a different field right now. There are 1,500 private unicorns and there are like 8 to 10 public significant tech IPOs every year. If you're in a Series D unicorn, IPO is probably not on the table, and M&A is much less likely than it used to be. And Carta has some great stats on this. I definitely follow Peter Walker on LinkedIn. He has great stats on both like compensation for tech employees, but also like VC stuff. The data is just not great. And there are a lot of employees that are in these positions. They're very uneducated about it, even the senior ones. I think the stat that he posted was about 20% of people who are exercising their options when they're like at a company or leaving a company are doing it when those options are underwater, like meaning they have zero value and probably wouldn't have any value unless it actually increases in valuation over the next 2 years. It's just unlikely that you're going to get a huge payout. There are exceptions to that. Of course, if you go to ByteDance and it never IPOs, you can still sell things on the secondary market. There are tender offers, but those are exceptions rather than the rule.
Yeah, personally, from my experience, just so people know, my ThreadUp stock did, I think something like 100x. So got lucky there when it IPO'd. Unfortunately, the stock is down like 90% since IPO. So there's a question of like, can you even time the market correctly in terms of when you sell it? And then for Epic Games, they let me sell like 11% at a time. The valuation is roughly the same as what I was granted at. So that's my real world experience. I'm curious if you're willing to share, like, you've been at some of these companies. What were the outcomes for your equity?
Yeah. So only one of the three companies where I was a leader did I have options. And stock options you can sell on secondary markets or you can have tender offers. And so I was able, luckily, to liquidate most of them. And I just happened to do it when other similar market companies were going to IPO. And I kind of knew that was a peak, like, oh, investors want the next one to come, right? So I was able to do that. But the other two, when you get to the late stage, are RSUs. And you can't sell RSUs unless they have some sort of special agreement. RSUs aren't really yours until there's an exit event. And so pretty much you're SOL in that case. And until there's an M&A or an IPO, you're not going to get any value from them. Luckily, there's no strike price, so they won't go underwater unless it goes to zero. But that's a challenge. I can't sell my RSUs, even if those companies are going to do well for a while. If they never have an exit event, it's not going to lead to any liquidity.
I do think in defense of growth stage companies, they're really good for growing your career and learning. They tend to move faster than the giants, and they tend to be growing boats, growing orgs. So especially if you want to make the jump from IC to leader, for instance, they're often taking their best ICs and making them leaders.
Yeah, I almost write tongue in cheek when I write about like pre-IPO cash outs are a pipe dream or 5 reasons not to join a startup. It's a catchy thing and people want to go and engage with it. And there's very real reasons why I say that. It's because the lottery ticket game is not in your favor versus going to a big company. But that's only one small slice of why anyone should go to a startup. You should go for career growth, passion, the culture of how product up decisions are made, like the less in the house work, the more like on the ground working with customers, the autonomy you feel, right, when you're doing these types of things. But yeah, the reality is exactly what you said. Career growth is huge at these companies. It's a great way if you bounce back and forth between FANG and hypergrowth, and then you up a level and then go back to FANG at a higher level. Like that's a very common path I see for folks. And it's because chaos is a ladder. There's just a lot more chaos in these startups. Your leaders will either grow really fast in their career and then you grow under them, or there's leadership shakeups and then you get promoted in a way that happens way, way less in a big company, or they'll just fill that position with another leader who's kind of shuffled over from another org. So lots of what you need to do if you're going to join a pre-IPO company, and most people honestly don't have any choice, but the people who do have a choice should consider them, but just for different win scenarios. Yes, it's great if you get that lottery ticket win, but just make sure you're also winning, even if that doesn't happen. You're getting exposed to a new tech like AI, you're getting people leadership opportunity, you're growing in your career in some other dimension, or you just enjoy it. You're going to enjoy your day-to-day life more. Something has to be a win for you, and don't just get held up that, oh, I need to have a cash out. And if that's really important to you, if you have to pay the bills and you're relying on that, try as best as you can to go to a company that has liquid compensation.
Yep. Okay, so we talked a lot about targeting companies, getting interviews. Now I want to talk about what the actual interview process for product leaders is these days. I think in the last 5 years, there has been a complete evolution. And what I mean by that is, more than 5 years ago, if you job searched, you probably didn't have homework and a presentation. But nowadays, I think like 90% of leadership job searches have one.
Yeah, it is, especially like growth stage. It's like almost guaranteed. Public companies, very, very common, unless you're talking about like specific ones like Meta, where they have a very formulaic kind of process. And even then, they've introduced this new interview type, which is like talking about some past project, right? So it is everywhere. And honestly, it's not a bad thing. It's just hard on your time, right? That's the only thing there. But yeah, cases are common across all these interviews. I'm seeing every single candidate go through it. There are exceptions though. So the entire interview process and loop varies based on if it's FANG, like a big tech company, small startups. You will find everything from, I never talk to anyone who knows anything about product. All I talk to is my peers. This has happened a lot. And then it's mostly behavioral. Maybe they'll ask me some technical, specific things to that market or that function. And then people have gotten offers like that, never doing a product case interview, never doing anything like that. Sometimes not doing a presentation. You'll find very disorganized. Don't be surprised if you're going for earlier stage companies, extremely disorganized processes. They just don't even know how to evaluate because they've never done it before or haven't worked with great people who have done it before. But the majority of times you're going to find either entirely behavioral and then this like presentation, or a mix of behavioral and product case interviews. And the division of those just depends on the culture of the company.
Building great products is not easy, but today's podcast partner, StatSig, provides a complete platform for product growth. Here's how. Step 1. Keep building features behind feature gates. StatSig will allow you to turn these on whenever everything is ready. Even better, you can just open a feature to 5% of your users to validate it before launching. Step 2. Run A/B experiments easily. You can make data-informed decisions about your product. What's even cooler, StatSig will give you valuable insights based on events you log. And step 3, analyze. StatSig is a full tool for product analytics, session replays, and web analytics. Used by customers like OpenAI and Notion, StatSig is the most modern all-in-one data platform. And best of all, it can be used as fully cloud-hosted or run on top of your data warehouse. So check out statsig.com/growth. And if you reach out, tell them Akash sent you.
Okay, so the case interview still exists for leadership roles. As far as I've seen it, like once you get to VP level, it really decreases off. But for directors and GPMs, it still exists. In my case, we mean like design a pen for the blind, the old school stuff like product design or product strategy. If you were CEO of YouTube, what would you do next? That's one category. That's like the product case. What I've seen is like this product homework is very often company specific. It's like, we want to hire you, Colin, as head of product growth at Apollo. What would be your 30-day strategy or something like that? Like it's causing people to have to research the product that they're going to work at, I think, a lot more than they might have in the past.
This has been funny. This has been a funny realization for me once I started coaching other leaders versus my own approach. Because my approach going into every single company I've ever applied to was, before I even talked to them, I had an opinion about their strategy, like their market, where things are going, how I would change their product. That was just like what I did. I just loved doing it. And so when I heard that people were like, when I see a case, this was back when the times were good, people were like, I see a case assignment, I don't even like apply. I'm like, that's crazy. Like that you have to. How else are you going to know you even like want to do this or know what to do on day one? So you just have to bring that passion and do the extra effort. And the difference between the people who are passing these cases and not, other than, profile and preference differences, like in their past, like their brands or whether they're a referral. Beyond that, it's the level of effort they do. And I can tell, like when I get the case presentations from people for me to review for some of the big companies or even the like startups, I can tell whether they spent 2 days, day and night working on it, or if they spent the 3 hours that they say that you should work on it. It's a huge difference. And the depth of thinking, the depth of, research that they did, even interviewing people themselves, using the product, breaking it down, thinking through the strategy, thinking through the execution. You have to do those things at an extra level now. And just because there are so many more people, great candidates, that are going to get to the final rounds before. It used to be that there was maybe 2 good candidates. One was clearly better than the other. It's not the case anymore. You're going to have 2 to 5 really good candidates in the pipeline. And at the end, almost always 2 candidates that they can pick between. And honestly, like you just have to do the extra effort. Spend that night working on that deck. Make sure that you've covered the angles that others might not have, and have an opinion about it. But to be honest, even going into your first conversations with hiring managers, this is something that I hear from executive recruiters all the time. You have candidates that are overconfident, and then they go into these things and they're like, I'll just wing it. I don't have my like narrative prepped down, and I haven't really thought about the company. I asked them a bunch of questions about the company. And then you have another candidate come in. They're like, I clearly have done this and this. I've tailored my narrative to the company. And hey, have you been thinking about this? Let's talk about the strategy. Let's talk about the market competitors. Those are the candidates that move forward.
Yeah, I just had Eugene Segal in the newsletter describing what's worked best for him. And he said he creates the strategy doc whether they ask or not. And especially with the hiring manager, he always presents it. He just finds a way to insert it into the conversation.
Yeah, and this is great. We use this a lot for negotiation. I run a negotiation coaching service, and we use this for negotiations all the time. We usually do it at the end, but like during the entire interview process, you're gathering intel. You're asking like other team members that you're going to talk to, like, oh, what are the things that are working, not working here? What are the strategies? Who do I have to work with to get things done? What are the goals and metrics? What's the strategy thinking in the company? And then by the end of it, once they give you the offer, then you have a conversation with the hiring manager where you actually present your vision for the role, your 30, 60, 90 plan as a discussion document. And I've had so many like senior leaders, at like Meta, like, people going for M2 or director level at Fang. And they're like, Colin, this is stupid. Like, why am I doing this? I've already talked to the hiring manager, like, this is all dumb. And I'm like, just do it. Just do it. I have to like convince them for like an hour, maybe like tons of text messages. And then they do it. And then they're super embarrassed and they like go and they share the doc and then they have the conversation. And then they come back and inevitably they say, Colin, my new role is always do what you say. If they loved it, like they're like, even if they're like, oh, it was weird and surprising, like sometimes they're like, what, why did you do that? They're always impressed by it. It always makes you stand out. And sometimes it's like really changed the minds of hiring managers. They've actually said like, we weren't really considering you until you did that. So I 100% agree that you should do the extra work. And honestly, just like pretend that you're already here on the job. This is an ethos that works 100% of the time for really like optimizing your ability to make it through, especially the later rounds and those presentations. If people get the sense that you're already working with them, I don't say you or the company name when I'm talking about things. I say we. And people have said this I just did it naturally because I love like learning how to collaborate with people. And leaders have told me in these interviews or in these coffee chats on the side that, hey, like you said, we a lot. I love that. And you can just feel the difference in the passion there and the connection. If they can visualize working with you, which means have you thought at their level? Have you read their mind? Are you thinking about things they're not thinking about? Those are the things that differentiate those top candidates, especially in a market like this.
Say more about those presentations because a lot of people I talk to are failing at that stage. So they'll be pretty good at getting to final round. They'll get like 4 or 5 final rounds. They'll have a 0% conversion rate to offer. Oftentimes I've noticed that these final rounds are kind of like an exec panel. Like they might not even have been told, but all of a sudden the CEO decided to join and ask some tough questions. So how do people succeed in this round?
Yeah, I do want to caveat that the 0% like success rate on that is partly just because of the competition. Because I hear the other side of it. Like I talk to the exec recruiters about like, what are the conversations behind the scenes? I talk to the executives. And sometimes it's not even up to the hiring manager, the skip level, or the CEO. Sometimes the board comes in at the last minute. And because the CEO or the hiring team did not align with the board throughout the process on why they're pulling certain candidates forward, it's a surprise to them at the end. They're like, oh, that person doesn't have this profile. Here, take this other person I know, or this other person has this pedigree. You definitely have to hire them. And so that happens sometimes. Sometimes it's because you're up against someone who's a referral, like a close connection that someone's worked with. So those things aside, it is true, though, that I've seen case presentations that just aren't deep enough. They are not covering the depth, the breadth, and honestly, like your ability to not just say what you'll do, but say everything in a narrative vision that is compelling for people. Especially if you get to the VP and the CXO level, sometimes they'll actually have you go in front of one of the engineering teams and do a presentation. They'll have like each of the candidates do this. And the reason for that is because they need someone who's going to inspire people. And if you're not able to level up that, like what you're doing to a vision level, to thinking about where the market's going, and then all the way down to okay, we're not just talking about like 2 or 3 basic personas, but like here are the personas, here's some research I've done on them, here's some market research on like what we can expect each of them to feel, go deep into each of their specific jobs to be done, that like their real lives, visualize it for them, get into data, get into specifics of the actual product that you're building, do the mocks. Like when I've seen some candidates do it, like honestly, it impresses me because I'm like, I wouldn't have done that much. I couldn't, like I would have gone up against you and like not done that well. But that's just the level you have to do. And it's not everyone can do that, right? Like I can't tell you like, here are the 5 things to include in your case presentation. But what you can do is definitely get mentors who are really good at their job at the one or two levels above you and get them to review it for you. I see lots of candidates doing this, and they're just like, oh, I completely rewrote my presentation last night after this like VC or this very respected person told me, like tore it apart essentially. And that's just the level of what you need to do in this market.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, honestly, like as someone who gives out job search advice, but also helps people with hiring decisions. Like, honestly, these days, the most common call I get it from is like from founders. They want to know like when they should be hiring a CPO, when they should be hiring a VP of product. It seems like my audience has really trended that direction. So I'm trying to like balance it all out. It's like, it's kind of unfortunate that you have to do this like 50 hours of work to land the role. But if you're a candidate, this
Yeah.
is why candidate market fit is pretty important, you know? And so I actually do respect those people who say like, yeah, they had to do a case round and I didn't decide to do it because I'm just not that excited about this role. I feel like before you put in this 50 hours, do ask yourself, like, based on the 2 interviews or 3 interviews I've had now, would I love this role? Am I willing to put in 50 hours? Because if you're only willing to put in 5, it might just not be worth your time to even try.
That's a very good point. I would say that I agree with that. I like the fact that if someone knows what they're going to have a really good chance of doing and like whether it's worth putting in the effort. The one caveat I would say is if you haven't done it well before, you need reps. And sometimes that rep takes 50 hours to see what good looks like. Then you put it in front of them and you see how it tears down and you see what questions they ask. You see where people are going, not sure, right? That gives you a lot of signal. So I would at least try to do it once if you have the opportunity in a role that, isn't necessarily a good fit. And this is another strategy just for your job search in general. I usually have 3 tiers of companies when people are doing target company lists. Your ideal companies, the companies where like, if it's a good enough role / offer, I'll take it. And then your practice or big swing companies. Like, so usually they either pay really well or like you think it's a shoe-in for you to get it. And those companies are really good for practice or for leverage in negotiations. And surprisingly, some people actually take the roles at those companies. So they would never have applied for them except for using them as practice or leverage, but then they end up getting convinced. So it's a worthwhile thing to do. But I totally agree with you. Knowing your candidate market fit, knowing where to put your energy is important. It's a slog. The job search is a slog, but unfortunately the case is that you have to put in way more effort than whatever you think your effort level needs to be, it's probably like 2 or even 10 times the amount.
Yeah, so for the product leadership job search in this market, because there is a surplus of experienced product leaders out there. And so hopefully it corrects itself for the next 4 to 5 years. And we're telling a different story to everybody that this round has kind of been eliminated because I do think it's ridiculous. Like we're talking about people with like TC 600K or something like that, spending like a week of their life for free in the job search. I don't know what the world has come to, but that's what it is right now.
Let's be real for a second. Like, this is the normal. It feels defeatist, right? Like it can be very easy to get in this, like, oh my gosh, it's never going to work out. Like, is it always going to be like this? Is this the new world? I don't think so. Everything went down like 50% from the peak. There's a surplus, but it's starting to wash out. Like the jobs aren't going up like crazy, but there's consistently more jobs now than there were like at the beginning of the year. And it's starting to wash out. There's starting to be a little bit better market for candidates. It's just going to be a slow recovery over the next few years. And so it's just this time. Sometimes you hit what is it that Gandalf said in Lord of the Rings, right? Like, it's not for us to decide on like what times we live in, but like what to do with ourselves when we're given in the time that we're given. I probably butchered that quote, but the sentiment is there, right? Like if you grew up in wartime, you can only control how you act in that wartime, right? You can't control that there is a wartime. And so right now it just happens to be wartime. And hopefully on the other end, there'll be, peaceful days.
Exactly. And just so people know, it's not wartime for everybody. I was just recently working with somebody who's left a name-brand company. He was only in 3 processes. He got offers in all 3. All 3 of the processes reached out to him. So there are people who are back in the like ZERP era levels of job search.
There are 2 worlds. So this is hilarious because I run a negotiation coaching company, which is totally just the people who are succeeding. And then I run job search services, which is all the people who have been struggling for 6 to 8 months. and it's night and day, right? Like I know people who have very similar profiles, but one person over here is like, oh yeah, they reached out to me. I was at Amazon. They reached out to me, and now I'm at like TikTok or Uber running like ads. They're the only company I did. And we're able to negotiate a 100K increase for them per year. And it's just like super easy for them. And then there's this other person who has this amazing profile who's been on the market for 8 months just because no one will find like the perfect fit for them. And honestly, like it's unfortunate, but at least there are these jobs happening. The challenge is that even though there's so many great candidates on the market who are not in jobs anymore, people are still defaulting to, let me poach people from other companies. And they still have this sentiment. And I still hear it from even executive recruiters who know the market is crap and know that there's this surplus of talent. They still have the mentality, and the founders that they're working for, the hiring managers and executives they work for, still have the mentality that the best people are in jobs. And it's an unfortunate bias because it's absolutely not the case in this market. Some of the best people do not have jobs right now. So if you're a hiring manager, like, look for the people who are actually applying, who are actually out there looking for jobs. Consider them. It's not because they're not great. It might be because they decide to take a sabbatical, which is a huge thing that happened in the last year because there was so much burnout with all of the demoralization with all the layoffs last year. And then they're now coming back on the market and finding that it's a little harder than usual. So even if they have a gap, don't use that as bias against them.
Yeah, I think that this is just reality. And this is probably the other thing that I just have to convince a lot of people about. But your biggest weakness, if you don't have a job right now, is that you don't have a job right now. It's nothing else. And so people have to tell a positive story about that, though. I'm surprised how many people just want a full-time job search for 6 months. I really don't think that's the solution. I think it's a really good idea to like have some other story. Like, I've been consulting as a fractional CPO. I have been trying out content. I have been trying out Maven courses. Like, I think it's much better to actually do something. And if you're willing to get your hands dirty, my favorite go-to recommendation these days is like build an AI product.
Yeah, 100%. Building products, advising. It was very interesting. I was working with someone who is, well, I don't want to give too much information because it's such a niche area that you'll probably identify them. But I was working with a high-level executive who was like left his job, was very, very sensitive to this. He knows that like being between jobs is tough. Immediately tried his best to find an advisory role, like which was pretty disadvantageous in terms of like money and things like that. But he got a role at a decent type of company, and that's kind of giving him this runway to be able to then go out, search, and do it from a position of power. Other people freelance. Other people have been building AI products, like you say. That's a big thing that I saw a few of my friends do, and they ended up in roles eventually. But yeah, some have some story, either personal development or professional development during that time. The other thing I'm seeing a big trend of is a lot of people are taking for now jobs, which is they're taking a job that they don't necessarily intend to stay in for very long. People have different ethical takes on this. Some people are like, especially at the higher levels, they're like, it's completely irresponsible of me and unprofessional if I'm going to take a job that I don't intend to spend the next 3 years of my life giving my all to. But for a lot of people, they're willing to take a flyer on some sort of job to have cash position for their family, just a sense of like accomplishment and the feedback loop you get of being good at what you're doing when you're on job search for 6 months and not getting good feedback. That makes you feel like you're worse than you are, right? So they get their confidence back in these roles and they keep looking. And some of them just decide after a little while, after keep looking, they're like, yeah, there are some better roles out there, but I actually kind of like it here. And so they stick with it. So consider that, between taking a step back and taking a for now job or taking, a consulting or advisory position, consider those types of things before you, just go on this job search and get this feedback loop for yourself that you're not worthy and you're missing out on the kind of like self-confidence that work gives you.
Talking about ethical quandaries, what some people who have very high ethical standards may not know is that a lot of people who get laid off don't put the layoff on LinkedIn or on their resume. They leave the role as present. And they say, oh, if somebody asks, then I'll say I'm laid off. What's your take on this behavior, and should people consider it?
I've got back and forth on this, and there's actually like pros and cons to it. It's not as straightforward. I wish I had a straightforward answer, but this is the pro. You will show up as talking about SEO and LinkedIn. If you're in the role, if you're not at the company anymore, but you show up as at the company, you will get inbound way more. people will consider your application way more because they think you're in that role. What I've heard from executive recruiters specifically on the topic is that they usually discover that you're not in that role, and it hurts you. It hurts your profile and your position. They say that, and they say that like, oh, that can sometimes hurt your candidacy. My take on it sometimes is, well, they wouldn't even be in front of you. So like you kind of like have a worse profile, but at least you're in front of them. So maybe you can get over that. But I think ethically, I've usually told people to, my default position is to be honest about it and go try to find something new. But I don't hold it against anybody for leaving it on there, honestly. And a lot of those types of decisions in this market, I see people making tough decisions that they wouldn't make in any other market, like the for now roles, or some people are taking offers, waiting it out, and then taking another offer later just because they wanted to have an offer in hand and then reneging on that offer. And to be honest, what I've heard from the hiring managers in most of those cases is, I kind of don't blame them. And sometimes they actually are like, maybe that person will come back to us later if they realize that the role isn't bad, which is very different than what I expected to hear, which is, oh, that's terrible. I would never work with that person again. Like, I'm going to blackball them. So it's really up to you. You have to do that inner kind of like investigation of whether your ethics align with that. But, I don't hold it against people, even if I wouldn't do it myself.
The other ethical decision I see people making, especially leaders, is they'll act like they haven't updated their LinkedIn in a while. So they might have had a short stint. Very, very common with leaders these days where they had like an 11-month stint and then the founder fires them right before they were about to get their big vest. And so they just leave as that they were present on their last job. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've heard that from the executive recruiters too. I didn't actually consider that myself. Like, oh, is someone just like completely left it off? I've seen it since then. But a very senior executive recruiter told me that, hey, we will find out. Like, you can't hide from us eventually that you've worked in that job. We will find out. And it doesn't look good. Whether that means that 100% of the time you lose out on the opportunity, that's a different question. So it's the same kind of like gray area type of decision that you have to make. But yeah, sometimes you can spin it. If you've been in a place for a short time, people will understand it. If it's your fourth 1 to 1.5 year stint at a place, like, you have to consider your options there, because that is a narrative that people will have about you. Even people with great positions, honestly, they get hit pretty hard these days for having a lot of jumpiness, even though it was almost impossible not to be jumpy in the last market, either because you were getting poached all the time with these crazy offers, or because layoffs happened in 2022, 2023. The market just is, some people are sensitive to it, others aren't. And so I understand if someone's going to make that call.
So it's understandable. You should understand what other people are doing out there. I'll just go out and say, I don't think it's super ethical. I know a lot of people are doing it and they're just acting dumb. They're just acting like they didn't update their LinkedIn. I personally think it's bad for the industry and it reflects badly on you for doing that. But just know that a lot of your competition is doing that. So let's move into negotiations. This is your other area of expertise. And just start with like in this market, because we've been talking a lot about the state of this market. Like, how does one negotiate? What's changed from maybe how they might have negotiated 5 years ago?
Yeah. So the main thing that's changed is the market, and the market is only like one component of what goes into a negotiation. And so what happened, if you look on a timeline, I mapped this out in one of my articles where I analyzed all the offers that you saw at like L6 software engineer at Amazon. And it used to be huge variance, like tons of above band offers, tons of below band offers, honestly. And then it all compressed down to like nearly nothing in 2023. And then it started expanding out. And it's definitely not the same like number of offers going out as it used to be. And there's definitely fewer exceptions above bands. But top of band offers are still going out there and they still exist. And I'm seeing that on the ground when candidates are negotiating. So once you get into that spot of like the offer round, and especially if you've been able to position yourself as a market of one for that role, then you're going to be able to negotiate quite well. On top of that, there's other types of leverage. There's the basic types of leverage that people know. And then there's some other leverage internally that you can create for yourself. And, it's all kinds of a kind of an information game. So if I were to say stepwise what you do during a negotiation, number one, before you even start your search, you have to prep early, like get practice rounds on your interviews, know that what you're going to say in those early conversations with negotiations. but it's mainly about lining up your options. And those 3 tiers of company we talked about, the high paying, like high leverage companies that you might not go for, but like maybe with the right offer, the companies which are your core, and then your top ideal companies. And just make sure you're going to line those up so they're coming in at the right time, that you can use each for leverage. Sometimes actually not having an offer, but having an opportunity can be better leverage in some cases for some companies. So it's not always about, I need to line up all my offers at the same time. Exceptions to that are companies like Google, where like they really need to have like hard evidence sometimes, but even in those cases, I find opportunities can help. The second thing is you want to handle that first expectations question. So when you're in the recruiter calls early on, and they might ask you this out in multiple calls, what are your salary expectations? This is all an information game. And a lot of people will give you advice to like, give a range, or, maybe come in a bit higher than where you were before. You can always change it later. In my experience, that's not the case. If you anchor on something, it's very, very difficult to come back from that. And even if when we have come back from that, it's a lot of teeth pulling. Like it doesn't feel as good. It doesn't feel as smooth as when you do price discovery later. So you just say, hey, I haven't thought about that. In my experience, there's so much more that goes into compensation than just like the numbers. I need to find out more about the role. I also need to go through my other processes. We'll talk about it later. You can ask them for the range for the role. Take it as a grain of salt. Don't agree to it. Just act neutrally whenever you get information. It's just about collecting information that you can use later.
Can I interrupt you really quick? So I've
sure.
been pressed in that interview where they're just like, is this range okay with you? Especially when those down level things are happening. Like I was a director, but I've just taken this principal interview that happened to me in my last search.
Yeah.
What do you think about, and how do you handle that when the recruiter presses you on that?
Yeah, certainly. And this definitely does happen. The first thing I try is actually just repeating myself. I will just say again, hey, I found in my experience that like at this point in time, talking about compensation is just not the right thing. Neither of us know whether this is the fit yet. I want to focus on that. Or if they keep pushing, then there are different categories of like follow-up objections. And when we like coach people, we have like this whole list of objection buckets and how to answer those different questions. One of the common ones is dependent on like where you are in your search. You might say, hey, I've just started my search. I'm just not like familiar with the market rates. You might know better than me. And if they press you, they're like, hey, this is the range, and we're not like, it doesn't make sense for us to move forward or waste anyone's time if you're not going to tell me like this is going to be okay for you. Then at that point, you're pressing you a certain amount. You're going to kind of in a couched way say, hey, right now everything looks good. Let's move to the next phase of the process. And I would love to learn more about finding a role. And I'm sure we'll find something that works for all of us at the end based on what you've told me. And so it's kind of like agreeing, but kind of vague. Very rarely have I seen like fourth or fifth attempts, like where they're really pressing. It has happened. It definitely has happened. It's very rare though. And in those cases, if they push you into saying yes for something, then you're going to have to just use the recovery method. And the recovery method in any negotiation is any piece of new information, external or internal, can be used to reopen the negotiation. And so, yeah, you'll be able to recover later. I'm just trying to tell you like how you should set up for the best, smoothest process. It doesn't mean it's impossible. And we often get people who are like, oh yeah, I told them what I made before. And I told them like, all the things that you should definitely not tell them. And we've still been able to have good outcomes for them. It's just very, very difficult. You're like coming from a deficit.
Yeah, you should never tell them what you made. Even if they press you on that, you should try to use the avoidance strategies you were just talking about.
Exactly. What you made, what you expect, all of that above. Some executive recruiters have a completely opposite advice, and they're very experienced. So like, to some degree, they're coming from a good place where they'll say, hey, just be upfront with us. You're not in a junior position anymore. Just like tell us. And I know that in my experience, the candidates who know what they want get what they want. The problem is they know what they want, but they don't know if that's the market price in this market for this role. So what I find very often is that sometimes the role scope changes by the end of the process. Sometimes budgets that were completely not negotiable, remote policies that were not negotiable at the beginning, all of a sudden completely thrown out the window, and you get board approval for some like crazy offers at the end. And if you anchor yourself early, then it's going to be harder to ask for those things later. Of course you can, but it just makes it much harder. So that's the handling expectations piece. The third part is like you have to build leverage. There's multiple different types of leverage. I call it the merit framework. So the market is part of it. And that includes like, what is the company going through right now? Did they just have layoffs? Are they having hiring freezes, right? You have to kind of be aware of that. And that's a little bit outside of your control. But the company will have more leverage if they have a very good excuse. For example, if they're a Series B company that's having trouble with fundraising or like low in cash, there's only so much they can do there. The second is expertise, and that's where your market of one, your candidate market fit, all of the above come into play. And during that process, it's all about reading the tea leaves and trying to get as much intel about like, what are the specific pain points about this role that I uniquely can bring my experience forward and say, I have done this, I can do this, right? And if you're that candidate and you become that candidate, even if you don't have a great brand on your resume, I've seen people throw money, throw titles at people, even if that person's only offer is that opportunity, because they're like, that is the person I want for this role, and I'll move mountains to get them. Third is results, just like past achievements, quantifying your achievements. The more that you do that, the better opportunity you have. The fourth one is what I call an inventory of your options. And so in that case, it's about like, what are your other opportunities on the table, other offers, your current job? Do you have upcoming equity vesting, those types of things? But I would not reveal most of that information until the end, until you're actually in the negotiations and you package up a very coherent counteroffer strategy. So you don't even do it live on the call the first time when you get the offer. And then tactics, and that's just how you communicate, how you build rapport with people during the process, how you like lengthen out the process in some case and line things up, and build relationships with the decision makers. And that communication tactic part is very important. So that's how you build leverage, and that just like dispels the myth. People think you have to have other offers. If you don't have other offers or you're not in a job right now, you have no leverage. It's completely not the case. I have people who have been off the market for 4 months. They have no other offers. We get them like 100. I had someone get $200,000 in their first year as an increase without any other leverage other than the internal leverage they built up and their just willingness to like ask for it and push. So yeah, it's definitely possible to negotiate there. So number one, you prep, have everything set up. Number two, you handle the expectations questions. Number three, you build your leverage with the merit framework. And number four is about selling your value. And this happens throughout the process, but especially, like I said, with that 30, 60, 90 plan and that role vision doc, and having that conversation with the hiring manager. So you get the offer, you're on the offer call, they tell you things, and there's two principles for that call. You act excited about the company and the role, but very neutral about any information you get. If you have a discussion there, you can always ask follow-up questions about details after on email where it's more neutral. You can ask like, how did the team come to this decision? Very neutrally, not disappointed, not excited about it, just neutrally, and gather information if you can get it. Then you say, thank you. You know, I never make decisions live on the call. I always bring it back to my family, my mentor, take a night to like think about it, and I'll get back to you later. If they're pressing for timelines, just be aware of it, acknowledge it, say, I know that you guys are on a timeline. I'm very aware of that. I have to, speak with my family, et cetera, to make the decision first, and then I'll get back to you very timely, and we can organize a time to meet next. Once you bring that back, that's when you ask to have time with the hiring manager and sometimes even the skip manager. Sorry, 1 second. So after you get that offer and you've bought the time, then you want to have this 30, 60, 90 call. So you put the doc together, 30, 60, 90 day plan, vision doc. I'll tell you what goes into that. And you schedule a call with the hiring manager and the skip manager to talk more about the opportunity and your vision for it. And this it has two dimensions. So it's about negotiation, but it's also an amazing reverse interview process. You put things on paper that people had told you, that the hiring manager told you in there. You put your vision for what the role is going to be, the strategy, the impact that you think it's going to have, the metrics you're going to drive, and then the 30, 60, 90 day plan. Who are the people you met that you're going to have to talk to and get buy-in for? That goes in there. Like what kind of shipping velocity it is. And then you put discussion items in line and at the bottom to make sure that like you say, these are my assumptions. I want to make sure that we're on the same page. When things are on paper, then you're good for the reverse interviewing. If things are on paper, it's very different than in conversation. If they see something on paper, they're going to tell you like, oh, actually, no, we're not wrong. And I would say probably 50% of the time that candidates go in and do this 30, 60, 90 plan call with the hiring manager, they realized that the role is not at all what they thought. I had a candidate go in, they were told that they were going to own this like part of the ads platform. And they were very clear. I've done that before. That's great. That's why they love me. They went, the hiring manager was like, oh, no one told you? Yeah, no, you're totally not doing that. You're doing this other thing, which you're also great for. And so they had a discussion about that. But then the second part of it is now building that internal leverage for making your offer. And this also is great for getting an up level, which is you show them that you really know what you're doing. You clarify what the impact is. You have them say the impact, right? They're like, yeah, you say, hey, like, it looks like this is going to unlock this for the strategy. This is going to be an important like new product launch. This is the metrics we're going to drive. And then you label it back. When they say it, you mirror it. You say, oh, okay, it sounds like this is going to be really important for X. So you're building up their confidence that you're going to have a big impact in the company. And then at the end of that call, then you can either, depending on the size of the company, you can have that compensation discussion with the hiring manager right there and say, hey, will you go to bat for me? I'm going to be asking for XYZ. Or you build the case, you have a call with the recruiting manager and say, hey, we talked about this. I have XYZ other opportunity, pardon me. We talked about the impact of this role. Maybe it's even at a higher level, but like, even if you can't get that title change, I think the compensation should be at that next level. And you bundle in all of the different arguments that you have there. And then you'll probably do one or two more rounds of negotiation. So that's the counter part of it. In the case of any negotiation, 4 ingredients have to be there. You have to be likable. They have to think you deserve it. They have to think you're justified and be able to justify that internally, especially to comp committees at big companies. And you have to feel winnable. So these are just like incredibly important things to make sure you do, especially when you're counter offering. So it's very possible for you to be firm and specific. I'm giving you, I want these numbers for these reasons. But at the same time, when you're having that conversation with the recruiter, you say, thank you so much. You're one of the best recruiters I've worked with. You got me this far. Thanks for advocating to me, right? You need to be likable. Second, you need to be deserving. So that's where you put the justification in. And they need to feel like through the interview process that you actually crushed it. Justification is on paper, like objective things. I'm going to be driving this impact. I'm going to be having this many people as scope. Or in the case of one of the best things I use for an up-level request, very often hiring managers are like, what does a title matter, right? Like, we don't care about titles here. Like, you don't need to be a director if you're a senior PM, or you don't need to be a VP. Senior director is fine. You're going to have scope. It's not true. Titles have except for firms like OpenAI or Stripe, where it's just head of for everyone. It's very flat. In companies, it matters a lot. You can't get things done as easily as a principal, as a director, when you're at any company, either with external partners or internal partners, or even your team. They will go above your head and try to find decisions to be made. And that's the best argument by far I've seen for getting a title bump. You're saying, I need to do this level of scope. I need to win over these people. They're going to respect me if I have this title. So I need that title. So that's justification, just having like a very clear argument that's hard to argue with for the committee, and then be winnable. So if they think you're using them as leverage, or you're not super excited about the role, that's why I say be excited about the role, neutral about the offer, then they're not going to fight for you. They're like, oh, we'll give them an offer, but like, I have to expend political capital. I have to go to the comp committee, get approvals from a CFO. It's not worth it because I don't think this candidate's going to accept. So just make sure that they know, if you get the right numbers, that like, hey, this is one of your top choices or the top choice. Sorry, that was a very long version of it, but those are very important ingredients to negotiating well.
Should you always ask for more? What if, when you look at the market data and when you think about your other conversations that you've had, they're already coming in high?
I have seen this very frequently, that people they'll say, I've topped everything out. You have so many conversations during the process. They're like, we're going to top you out. We're doing everything we can. We're getting like all these approvals. We're giving you the best offer possible on the first chance. And then you look at the data on levels.fyi, and it's the top offer. I would say more than 50% of the time, when you push back and like ask for more, they end up giving you more. And so even if it's like in those rare cases where you're like way like top of band already, and you know that, it's very rare that you actually don't get more if you ask for more. And I have not seen anyone get it pulled. If they're giving you top of band, you're not a candidate that they're going to be like, F you if you ask for more. Like they really want you. It's usually the candidates that are either unlikable, or like they feel as a risk, or like it's a very rare instance where the market is so tight, they have like 5 candidates behind you and like it feels like very stressful and you're just on the edge. So it really depends like the distance between you and the next candidate there. But if they're giving you a top of market thing, it's at least fine to ask. And they might say no. They say, we cannot give you more. We're already at 950 for an L7 and we can't go higher at like a Meta. That happened a couple of times. But that's fine. At least you asked, right? Because I've definitely had other times where they're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll give you 1.1 million, right? Instead of 950. And I don't know what makes the difference between the two sometimes, honestly. You make the same case, you do the same pitch, but at least you give yourself a shot at it.
So generally plan on asking for more. Having hired people, I think sometimes the hiring manager isn't even the best to know and the recruiter isn't even the best to know, because I've been wanting to hire somebody on my team. We work on a round or two of negotiation. They still come back with another, and I think, oh my gosh, even I can't go bat for them. But my skip level likes them enough that they will get that. So sometimes just what's available, we don't even realize.
It's so true. And this is why, like, I say not that 30, 60, 90. I do it with the hiring manager first because you don't want to go over their heads, just like you wouldn't in a job. But then sometimes I get them to go to the skip level. And it depends on who your hiring manager is. There's a couple of reasons why you'd go to the skip. One, the hiring manager just doesn't have that political edge and that confidence to know how to go to bat for you. You can kind of sense that out. Is this the type of person who knows how to like pitch you to the comp team and will fight for you? In that case, go to the skip. Or if they're just at a low level that isn't going to help, like if they're a director and you're going for an L7 role, the directors don't have as much sway as the senior director and definitely not the VP. So if you can get in front of that VP and do that pitch again, like do that 30, 60, 90, you ask them questions about the role, you frame it as like, I'm doing a reverse interview because that is half of the reason you're doing it. You can convince that person can go to bat for you and will have much more sway. And yeah, I totally agree with that. If you're in executive roles for like hypergrowth companies, so going way down to the startup level, the decision makers aren't just even the executive team. It's the board of directors that have to sign off on like equity packages and things like that at the executive level. Know that. Understand early on, like, does the board know that I'm like in the process now? Like, do that, like, try to get that out of the executive recruiter if you can, or even talk down or like, hey, like, what does the board think about this position and what they want for it? And then at the end, you might even talk to someone on the board and just like give them that little push that like you would be asking them questions about, oh, is the company, like, what's your vision for the company? They like to do that to pitch executive candidates. But it's also an opportunity for you to get them to be an advocate for you in the negotiation process.
Is there such a thing as pricing yourself too high? I had a couple of people write like that recently where they're like, you know what? I don't want to negotiate. Thanks for the advice, but I just don't want to make my job at risk. I just don't want to be a target.
Oh, like, yes, I come into the job and I'm being paid so much that I'm going to be the first one out if they do a layoff, right?
Yes, especially at those layoff-prone companies. I've had multiple people tell me stuff like this, like the Amazons and Metas, where they just keep seeming to have wave after layoff. They're like, yeah, I don't want to negotiate because I don't want to be, the high band person who's performing low band and all of a sudden get cut.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of it is like your confidence level. I think these are, by the way, these are like fairly niche scenarios, but they are real. I would say that in those cases, the people that are getting laid off sometimes are the first in, first out, like people who have high band offers, but it's usually because they're not able to make an impact. And sometimes that's out of your control. So I get why you'd be concerned about it. And you can weigh that in. You can figure out like, is this the manager that's really going to like go to bat for me, or the one that's going to like put me up for a layoff? But usually those layoffs happen for people who have like huge equity like increases. They've been around for like 3 or 4 years, and they try to get rid of those folks who, they owe a lot of money to on the equity vesting side due to appreciation. So it's not always the case. I think it's probably a little overblown. It was definitely the case when they were doing the mass layoffs in 2023. Like they picked all the people that were making the most like cut, right? But the layoffs now are a little bit more about, some of it's about cost cutting, but it's a little bit more about like their at least premise is, let's raise the bar. So if people aren't performing really well and maybe they're paid the highest, those are the two factors that go into the ranking of who's going to get laid off. But, should you not negotiate in that case? I think that's a little ridiculous. Like you might get laid off either way. If you're increasing your chances from like 50% to 70%, I don't know, like you make the choice whether you don't want to negotiate, but in my opinion, you should do it. You can't control what's going to happen after that.
We both feel like the confident archetype. But now that I've worked with the less confident archetype, I have a lot of respect for it. Also, as a founder, too. Like now, if somebody has a big salary on my team, I am thinking about are they generating the value? If somebody has a small salary on my team, I'm just like, yeah, I'm happy to keep them around. They have good vibes.
It's it's very true. Yeah. And if you're a startup, I think it's very interesting. It always seems to be this bimodal thing, right? It's like the big tech companies where they try to cut the, those super overpaid people. And then, yeah, startups, like when runway starts becoming tight, who are you going to cut? Like, is that head of sales really bringing people in as much to be worth like all the like crazy incentives we gave to just bring them on board, all those sweeteners? Is he worth that retention bonus, that 1 year retention bonus? Yeah, those things are real for sure. In my opinion, though, like if you feel like this is a very strong fit of a role, if you believe in the company, then negotiating for what like you actually are worth in that company is totally fine. And does that mean you have to like penny pinch every single last drop out of it? Probably not. You can do 1, 2 rounds, maybe 3 rounds of negotiations, depending on like the number of choices you have and how confident you feel like in your next role, if things don't work out. But I think the much more common scenario is that people are just afraid to negotiate and they don't want to, or they're afraid they're like going to burn bridges. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. If you do a good negotiation, you actually have more respect from the people. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. Yeah, sometimes like, yeah, you become a target if you have a very big price tag on your head.
I myself have found giving people sometimes that advice. Like they'll just be like, yeah, I have a $1.2 million offer and I want to go for 1.5. And I'm just like, is that going to make any difference to your life at all? But it is
That's
going to
so
put a
funny.
bigger target on your back.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, I definitely have heard this, and this is actually very common. I've heard it from candidates at the level of that level. Usually, it's around the like 900,000 plus level. When they start being like $100,000 isn't going to make like a big difference for me. I'd rather just like make this smooth sailing and come into the role. And I respect that decision. Like the reason I started doing the negotiation coaching is because there's so much variance, not based on merit for people's negotiation. And it's not going to change the way that the market is set up right now. It's all about price discovery. Like what is this person's intersection of very unique skills tied to this role and our need right now in this market condition? What is that price? And that price discovery only comes through negotiation. So I feel like that needs to happen for most people. There are definitely edge cases where people are like, I'm cool with not negotiating. I was just talking to a guy who was going to Google for some very big role. And he was scared of negotiating. He's like, that it's like when you looked on the bands and levels of FYI, what he wanted was already 250K above that. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Like it's worth trying. Like go for it. If that's like what's gonna make you happy to join them, and you're gonna feel really good about that role and not be looking around elsewhere, then just like let them know that. We did the negotiation. He got more than what he asked for, which was very surprising. He's probably like the most paid person in that space, and maybe we'll see if he has a target on his back in the future. But in the end, the process was really good for him. But his initial reaction at the beginning was like, I don't want to burn bridges with this person that I know really well who's hiring me. Yeah, I would say it's very personal kind of decision. But in 90+% of the cases, I would say people should negotiate.
Yeah, most likely people are under negotiating. And especially I have to call out, like if you're a woman, like in my experience, the data has proven it out in my real life experience too. The men out there are confident. They're like Colin, like they're just like, let's go. Like, let's ask for more money. So you have to consider what your competition is doing. And the majority of people do ask for money. Having hired lots of PMs, I would say like 80 to 90% of the people I hired negotiated. So you should go in realizing 90% of people are negotiating.
Yeah, I would say there's 3 main if you're thinking, should I negotiate, or like, why should I negotiate? Like, I'm happy, like it's a good income, whatever. There's 3 main reasons. The first one is that it is the norm. More than half of PMs negotiate for sure. And so it gets in this weird position as a hiring manager. So a lot of people ask me as a leader, why don't you change it? Why don't you just give a fair market rate? First of all, there is no such thing as a fair market rate. It's very hard for each person. And I want to hire the best people, which means, and they're going to negotiate with me half the time. So I can't give them like this crazy high number at the beginning. They're always going to ask for more. It's just like what they do. And so it's this game theory end game of like the negotiation has to happen. The other 50% of the people then are not negotiating when they totally could, and I'm expecting them to. So it's the norm. That's the first reason. The second reason, it makes a big difference over the long run. Like the difference in like 10 to 20%, I see also like the common increases I see, by the way, if you're thinking of like how much more can I get, 15% to 40%. Like those are the extremes. If you're getting only 7, 10%, unless you already had like this crazy top of band offer to begin with, because you already kind of set yourself up for that, it's usually 15 to 40%. But the difference between that and the original offer with appreciation of equity over the course of 4 years can literally be like $1 million, $2 million in some cases. It's pretty wild how much the difference can be. So that you're just missing out on that. And then the third thing is just that, like, honestly, like you need to advocate for yourself. Like it's a skill that you have to build in your career. If you're not able to advocate for yourself here, then are you going to be able to advocate for your product when you're in your role? Are you going to be advocating for that promotion? Are you going to be advocating for your team when they need something? And it's just a skill that, and you have to break through it. You have to build that confidence. And the only way to do that is through reps.
For my personal negotiations, what I found was most important was negotiating on my team, because I always wanted to have the commitment that, hey, I'm going to be able to hire 4 PMs, right? Like I'm not going to be expected to just handle the job of 5 people, right? Like if we have 4 engineering teams, which is often what happens for growth product leaders, or this is the revenue we're going to generate, and once we generate this revenue, we're going to expand the team this amount, or this is the cost we're going to cut. And so once we're going to do that, and I think tying it to those numbers around your 30, 60, 90-day plan and showing them the ROI is another very important area for leaders to negotiate, because the worst thing to do is you think you're going in to go hire a team, but they don't have the budget for you to do that.
Yeah, no, totally never been there before. Yeah, so I actually call this total offer value. And a lot of people just focus on total compensation, but it's only one part of what you're negotiating for, right? So that's the dollar numbers, including equity, right? Then there's what I call career skip prep. So are you negotiating to make sure that this role is going to set you up to get promoted in the future, right? Like, are you getting the right project, the right buy-in internally? Are they almost pre-committing for it? I would not use that in lieu of total compensation, because it's very easy to make promises and then take them back later. But make sure that you're getting a position that is actually going to be good for your next role, whether at that company or externally. Title and level, very big. Level is probably the biggest one because it's very hard to make up level. Title can be really important for, getting things done internally. Like I said, having the respect of your partners or external customers, as well as important for your career in the long term. Next, lifestyle, locale, hours. Like I've seen a lot of people, I went through an entire recruitment process where they're like, you have to work in New York City. All the PMs are in New York City. We're not changing this. And I was like, all right, like this is going to be a hard family decision. Let's just go through it. Got to the end. I was like, got the offer. And I was like, I can't move to New York City. And they were like, okay, let's just do it remote. 2 months later, 1/3 of the product team were remote. After that, I did that. So like being able to negotiate for a locale, or if it's a certain kind of travel schedule or hybrid or whatever it is, just make sure your lifestyle is part of it. Then like making sure, if you're more senior at the executive level, there are very special things that you can ask for, or even if you're just a senior, like well-known candidate, making sure you're protected on severance. So there are layoffs happening all the time. If you've been through like 2 or 3 hypergrowth companies, you know that things might not work out, especially earlier stage stuff. So you can actually pre-negotiate your severance if you have a high negotiation position or you're a more senior candidate. There's also acceleration clauses.
Actually, can we talk more about that? Because I don't think
sure.
many people do that, and more should. What is negotiating severance? What is a reasonable amount to negotiate?
Yeah, so it kind of varies, and it varies on your position, but generally you can get whatever you think that the severance is going to be for a very like modern big tech company. They usually have pretty generous severance. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on like all the way up to executive level. And so you have to kind of figure out like where you are in that ranking, and honestly what you need. And you can ask for that. And, if you ask for more, they can give you less, the typical negotiation game. But it's worth asking for it. And you just have to make sure that you're doing it. I would do it in person, and I would just make sure that they understand where you're coming from, that this is from your experience, that you understand the market. Like if you just ask for it and as throwing it in, they're likely to say no, but you can get people to empathize with you on why you're doing it. They just need to know that it's from a genuine place. But asking for like guaranteed 6 month severance, if a layoff happens or something like that happens in the next 12 months, or even in like the next 12 to 48 months, it's very common. Especially, it's more common in executive level, but I'm seeing it more and more in the senior level roles now.
Okay, so it's in the case of layoff. So it's not in the case of if you're underperforming.
For executives, it can be actually for cause, like unless it's like some severe cause, right? So it can be for underperformance for sure. The severance. You just have like slightly different bargaining positions depending on your seniority. So you can ask for it. Like if the company's going to struggle and there's going to be layoffs and my role's going to be eliminated, I guarantee this severance. If it's a high risk role, like I'm coming in to launch this new thing and it has very specific goals, then you might actually ask for, hey, if we don't perform in these goals and it just doesn't work out and you fire me, I need severance for that, just because I'm willing to take this risk versus going to like, a bigger or more established company with a longer run rate. And I've seen that succeed. It's honestly 50-50 or less for people who are at junior levels, but it's very worthwhile to ask for it.
Secta Labs allows you to upload 30 images of yourself that aren't great and create an infinite amount of AI selfies. I keep choosing them because they're always releasing new backgrounds and new remixes all the time. With their remix features and new drops, you can constantly get a new feed of pictures of yourself in various settings that look great. New content is something you can't get all the time. That's why I subscribed. It's the best quality, realistic, and so fun. So visit Secta Labs at my link, secta.ai/Akash, AAKASH. You get 10% off by using my link.
Yeah, I think not enough people know about this, but almost all C-suite execs negotiate this. Because as we know, CPOs have really short tenures, and unfortunately VPs of product do too. And I think a lot of VPs of product probably can negotiate this, but aren't.
Yeah. If you're senior director, if you're definitely VP plus, you should negotiate it. I had a VP tell me recently, he's like, part of this VP and hypergrowth kind of career, one of the realities you just realize is that all the paths, even the successful paths, usually end up to you leaving the company. Like at some point, the company grows out of you, or like, something happens that you leave the company. It's very rare that like a VP early on will stay forever. And so you just have to plan for that inevitability. Much of it is outside your control. So definitely negotiate for severance, especially if you're in a leadership role.
And then you were talking about acceleration clauses.
Yeah. One more note on severance before we go into acceleration clauses. So if you're negotiating for severance, you feel maybe your negotiation coach, if you're like using someone who's not familiar with that kind of thing, very often you can go to what are called like compensation lawyers in places like Silicon Valley, et cetera. They're very used to doing this for executives, but you could probably hire them for like $1,000 or something like that to review your contract, set up details of like what you're going to ask for in terms of terms, and they can help you out with that. And that'll give you a little bit more confidence in going ahead and negotiating for it. Acceleration, change of control. So if the company is acquired, if leadership changes, like gets fired, for example, like if you get hired by a founder and that founder leaves, you're probably going to get fired. All of those things can happen. And you want to make sure that your equity is protected primarily. So very often you can ask for some of your compensation in cash for the next X months. But very quickly you can get your equity accelerated. So it could be 100% of your equity. It can be 75%, 50%. It kind of like depends on the cases. I would go through this with a negotiation coach or a lawyer if you're at the like executive levels and making sure that you're asking for the right things. It also kind of depends on your role in the company stage. But essentially, if the company gets acquired, if the leadership leaves, if the board fires the leader, if the company IPOs even, right? Like you want to make sure that you're protected in case after that event, you get laid off. And so sometimes this includes additional clauses. So for example, if I'm not at the company within 6 months after this event happens because I'm laid off or for whatever, if I decide to leave because my role has changed significantly, then I get all my equity, or I get my equity plus a whole bunch of severance. So that's a very common thing for executives to negotiate, and very few people know about it until they get to that level.
Okay. So as an executive, as you reach these levels, talk to your friends, pay for advice, look at colonized content, but the game changes. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Are there other dimensions of negotiation that the game is changing as you move up?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So one of the things I didn't get to is exactly what you said. Negotiating for scope and resource guarantees, guaranteed headcount, guaranteed budget, guaranteed ownership of certain projects. You can actually put that in your contract when you get to the higher levels, or at least have handshake deals about those things. And that's really important. If you know that, especially, for example, this happens with growth leaders a lot, because with growth, you just have a certain number of things you need to do, and you need a certain number of people to get those things done. And if you don't have them, it's just not going to happen. And so you just need to make sure that you have those things guaranteed, and that's part of the negotiated scope. That sometimes will then lead to you getting guarantees from the CFO, or there's other background things happen there. In terms of other things that happen at the negotiation level, it becomes much more in person, much more informal. I know a lot of folks like to do negotiations entirely over email, but when you're at the top executive level, it's almost seen as unprofessional to do it. They want to jump on a phone call with you for almost every single detail, and it's almost unavoidable. At the director level, you can probably get away with it, maybe at the VP, depending on the size of the company. But yeah, it just becomes much more in person and about being more collaborative. You're on the side of them. You're trying to creatively come to something that is going to work for both of you. And sometimes that includes, compensation. Sometimes that includes, can we change the role level? Should this role actually be a VP or a CXO, right? Those types of things. And the only way you're going to get to that type of change is by being collaborative. And sometimes that means sometimes I've seen people fly in and talk to people in person to work out an offer and make sure that, everything is done. But yeah, in general, it's fairly similar. It's just the elements of the role that, of the compensation, like the severance clauses, accelerations, those types of things that become more important.
Okay, so we walked everybody through the life cycle. The final element you talked a little bit about, but that's where I want to kind of end the cycle of the job search is reneging and continuing the job search when you have an offer. I think that most people don't realize that these are even options or things that they should consider because they're just honest stand-up PMs who they don't job search very often, or they have never even had to do a real job search. Talk a little bit about those. Who should consider those? What are the pros and cons and strategies around this?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what happens. It's very hard for me to just tell everyone what they should do because this is a very personal, ethical question you have, and it's actually very contextual because it depends on what the other party is doing to make you do this, for example. But I've seen very common, if someone's given very high pressure situation where they have to sign or else, and they're waiting for other opportunities that might come along, then they will take that knowing that if that other opportunity comes along and it's more attractive, that they will either reopen the negotiation or renege on the offer and move on. And that's much more common now than it was 5 years ago. I would say probably about 10% of people back in 2017, when I first started talking to people about negotiations, would tell me they were even willing to do this or would even consider it. Now it's the majority of people. There's still quite a few people who are adamantly against it, and I totally get, where you're coming from. But it's become more of the norm these days. And that's partly especially in the last couple of years, people have this anti-company bias because companies were reneging on offers all the time. In 2023, they would give you offers and then you're about to start, it's almost day one. They're like, oh, sorry, you don't have a role here anymore. And you're like, I just quit my other job. And what am I going to do now? I have to go on my job search. And I was hoping that I would get this role and have this money and this stability, and you swiped it from under me. It is less harmful to the company, unless we're a C-suite hire, right? It is less harmful for the company in that case. The other time I see reneging is that you are taking an offer at a company and there's nothing else that you have, or maybe you have some other opportunities that are coming down the line. And you're like, this could work, but it could be a disaster once I step in the door and realize how this is going culturally. And I've seen some big time executives jump into a role, and within the first week, they're like, no way. Other company, hey, do you have an offer for me? I quit first week. And their perspective and the perspective of their hiring executive was, if this is not going to work out, rip the Band-Aid off now. Don't wait around for 3-6 months just because you feel hey, like that's the right thing to do. We need to go out and find the right person ASAP and not waste time with you.
Yeah, I've seen many, actually, the smartest career people I know have done that at least once in their career, where they leave like a week in and it never makes it to their resume. And that's why I tell people, like, keep job searching until that kind of first week. And it doesn't mean that you ever need to do anything unethical or renege or anything, you know? So you can just do it in a totally ethical way where you're just continuing to interview with other people and you keep those searches open. Like, people always, when they sign the offer, they're like, all right, I'm closing all my other things. I don't have this like rush. Like, they're so sick of job searching after 6 months. I'm done with it. I got an offer, Stripe. I got an offer this, but wait. Stripe might pay you more, and this other place that you went to might have a crazy product culture that you don't know anything about. So just continue the process has been my advice these days.
That is great advice. And I think like it's advice I've started to give, but like I love that you formalized it like that. I would say, yeah, keep interviewing, especially if you have like spidey senses about this company, like some yellow flags about the company. Keep interviewing until you're at least a week on the job and you have a sense of what it's really like from the inside. Because you will get a pretty clear sense of whether this is going to be a place where you're going to be successful and want to spend the next months and years of your life.
And then the other thing I would just say after the job search that most people don't realize, and we're talking to leaders here, is your job actually starts the day you sign the offer. So you should go start talking to customers. You should figure out everybody in your network who's a customer. You should go talk to them. You should be LinkedIn requesting your team and starting to meet your team. I think too many people, like, they want to start on day one, but the people who are successful, they're already coming into day one with like 30 days of work.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I hear two things. I hear some people are just like, I need, like, if I don't take this break, I'm just not going to be able to do this job well. But that those people don't tend to also correlate with the people who are like the A-type performers, like in general. Like they're people who are competent and like good at their job, but they're not like the top people. So yes, I agree. If you're a LeBron James, then you're going to sacrifice your family time to your Thanksgiving to go be in your hyperbolic chamber. I don't think it's that extreme. I think you should do the work ahead of time. And in fact, many founders actually expect you to, and they'll be like, yeah, let's jump on a call next week. And you're like, wait, I'm not starting for another month. Very common. And just realize that that's the expectation, that you're going to hit the ground running on day one.
All right, Colin, this has been an amazing discussion with so many insights for me as someone. I wish I could just pick your brain for another 2.5 hours, but thank you so much. If people enjoyed this, where can they find you online and how can they help?
Yeah, the best places to find me are on LinkedIn under Colin Warnell, and you can find my Substack newsletter, toptechnewsletter.com. And if you're negotiating or coming close to an offer sometime soon, then go to feelvalued.co, and my company there will be able to take care of you. We've done over 200 of these combined between us, and would love to help you get a great offer.
Yeah, I can personally vouch. He can help you with your job search, with your negotiation. So support Colin. Thanks for listening to this podcast, everyone. See you at the next one.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.